PCH driving, I needed some inspiring. Peace and quiet, I'm running from the sirens. They ain't been around, but they know about where I've been. Had to put the time in to let them know what time. Fuck a plug, you don't need it when you plugged in. They know it's us, we don't need no introductions. It's just us, we don't need no one for nothing. But it's always something. Skipping town, cause I really can't be around it. Sometimes the only way to go is right around it. Had some shit to say, I didn't like the way it sounded, so I left it where I found it. Yeah. Why stop now? Why stop now? No, not my style, not my style. Yeah, drop top down, that's my style. Why stop now, baby? Why stop now? PCH driving, I needed some inspiring. Peace and quiet, I'm running from the sirens. They ain't been around, but they know about where I've been. Had to put the time in to let them know what time it is. Got that in common, we all feel the pressure. Bitch, I'm plugged in, yeah, the vibe is electric. Room full of comments, they all trying to sex me. Feel like Dennis Rodman in 1997. What I do tonight, yeah. Eat that pussy like it's food tonight, yeah. They don't love me, but it's cool tonight. I like to keep it loose, but keep the moves tight. You was right, running numbers up, I'm shooting dice. Fuck a suit and tie, I'm loosey-goosey, but the moves are tight. Louis slippers never slipping, I just like to slide. I was on your side till you group me with these other guys. Hand on the blunt, I ain't done. Here come the sun, hair up in a bun, yeah. And I like what I see, she a freak. Said she only really do this shit for me, that's her cap. PCH driving, I needed some inspiring. Peace and quiet, I'm running from the sirens. They ain't been around, but they know about where I've been. Had to put the time in to let them know what time it is. Got that in common, we all feel the pressure. Bitch, I'm plugged in, yeah, the vibe is electric. Room full of comments, they all trying to sex me. Feel like Dennis Rodman in 1990. And it's all good.
All right. Welcome to the Give and Go Show. My name is Griffin Queen, and I'm joined by the man with the plan, the king without a crown, the wind beneath my wings, Matt Ferentinos. Thank you for being here today, buddy.
What's happening? Thanks for having me, GQ.
Of course. If you've checked out List Night, or if you've checked out any of my previous streams, which have, God, at this point, they're months and months in the past. I think the last time I officially streamed was probably like 6 to 8 months ago. We're in October now. I don't even know. You probably recognize Matt Ferentinos, either from jumping on the List Night pod or from playing some games with me. Before we get going, I do want to say, if you're watching us on Twitch right now, or if you're catching us on YouTube, we do appreciate you tuning in. We hope you appreciate the show and have a great time. If you are watching on Twitch, do not forget to hit that follow button. And if you are watching on YouTube, where we're going to upload this once we're done with the live stream, greatly appreciate if you hit that like and that subscribe button. Matt and I love talking basketball. It's why we're doing this. And the more people that are watching us talk basketball, the happier we'll be, because the thing that we crave most in the world is external validation.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, why else would somebody stream if not because they crave external validation? That's the only reason I can think of, right?
Well, and ball is life, so
ball is in fact life. Sometimes some would say it's potentially greater than life. I don't want to rule it out. Today, we're going to be talking two of the top divisions in basketball, two of the most popular divisions as well. We're going to be talking the Atlantic and Pacific divisions. Matt and I each, there you go, with that Brooklyn hat. I got my Lakers hat on, turned the other way so you can't tell, but I think you could tell. It's a Kobe Bryant retirement hat that my buddy Jared got me during his retirement ceremony a few years ago. R.I.P. the Mamba. So yeah, we're going to be talking Atlantic and Pacific. Each of us is going to be taking one of the two divisions, and we're just going to talk through each of it. Matt's got the Atlantic because he's a little bit East Coast, Beast Coast. I've got the Pacific because I'm out here in California. And we're just going to kind of give our predictions for the season, talk about some of their roster moves. And we're going to start as all good shows do, with the worst teams. And so, Matt, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Which team are we starting with today? Who do you think is going to be the worst team in the Atlantic Division?
I think the worst team to maybe one of our friends, Elliot's not going to love this, but it is and I'll say I'm sorry because these people love to apologize and they're very polite.
I feel like I know who it might be.
It is the Toronto Raptors. It was very close for me, though. I was looking at the division, looking down and breaking down all the rosters, which I'll do for the Raptors now. And it was either between the Raptors or the Knicks, which, to be honest, like looking at all of these squads, I could see everyone in the Atlantic Division making the playoffs. Just, I guess I have rose-colored glasses. I like to look things positively, and I've seen all these teams and especially the moves that they've made. I like to see the ceiling in a lot of these teams.
Sure.
So let's just start with last year, what the Raptors did. The Toronto Raptors were coached by Nick Nurse. They had a record of 27-45, which was
Nick Nurse, the legend, Nick Nurse, the guy who completely changed the face of that team. Let's not be hating on Nick Nurse out of the gate.
Not hating, Nick Doctor's a little better, but Nick Nurse is okay.
Sure. Yeah. His parents are probably a little displeased that he didn't quite get that doctorate. But our buddy Jared Jensen's in the chat, and his family knows all about that.
Oh, there you go. Dr. J, of course. But 12th in the Eastern Conference, did not make the playoffs last year. Executive with, I think, Masai Ujiri. I haven't said that name in a while.
Yeah.
They had 111.3 points per game, which is 19th of 30th. Not that great. Opponents' points per game was 111.7, so 15th of 30th. They're kind of middle in the pack for both of those. They like to run a little faster pace. I mean, everything in every one of their stats are kind of middle in the pack. They did have an exciting rookie class in their draft. They went with Scotty Barnes, which is the #1 pick, very high profile. I know Elliot wants me to talk about him, as we saw on Twitter, which he did look really, really good in his brief preseason action that he had there. Sure. In the second round, they had 2 picks, back-to-back picks. Delano Banton, point guard from Nebraska, and David Johnson, point guard from Louisville. Not sure what those guys are doing, if anything at all this season, but those are draft picks.
Well, I mean, it is a bit of the development year for them, so there's always the chance. And the Raptors have not been. I wouldn't say they've been quick to play rookies and guys right out of college, but they're usually pretty good at kind of going through the full roster and making sure everybody gets their burn, even if they are having a competitive season. That's one of the things that the Raptors have kind of thrived at over the past 10 years is that player development role, especially since Nick Nurse took over. But even a little bit when it was their previous coach, Detroit coach. I'm going to blank on his name right now. Embarrassing. First day of the pod, I'm already forgetting his name. Dwayne Casey. Dwayne Casey,
there you go.
I want everyone to know I didn't look that up. That's off the dome. If you're watching the video right now, I didn't look that up. Dwayne Casey, not a great coach, but also decent at development. Not one of the worst developmental coaches.
And I mean, the Raptors have always had exciting teams. I mean, 2 years ago they won the championship, and they still have a lot of core pieces from that roster. And their projected Vegas totals for wins this year is 35.5. I do have them above that. My projected record for them is 39-43. Just a few more nuggets about them. They were founded in 1995, so it's cool to know that I'm older than the Toronto Raptors.
Is that cool, or is that like maybe the saddest thing that we're gonna say on the show today?
Maybe a little sad, since I don't know if I've been a champion in anything in my life, and they did.
Well, you're a champion in
2019.
Yeah, you've got a basketball show on Twitch. So how bad can you really be doing?
Exactly. And let's talk about some of their additions that they got. They got Goran Dragic in the offseason. He wasn't too excited, and especially reading about when, he went over to the Raptors from the Heat, you could tell he wasn't too pumped, I guess, going from Miami, Florida to, Toronto, Canada.
To the coldest team. Maybe the second coldest team in basketball. I want to say Minnesota might be a little bit colder, but while Minnesota does have the Twin Cities, and I've heard good things about Minneapolis and St. Paul.
And they have a mall. They
have the mall, or the Mall of America, excuse me. I think I'd rather live in Toronto than Minnesota. So it could be worse for them. They could be playing in Minnesota.
It could be worse. And to be honest, like Kawhi just loved LA. He was always going to go to LA. And I do think that, he enjoyed his time in the Raptors. They were champions definitely for a few seasons. Kawhi was literally looked at as that GOAT, the one guy that can beat super teams. And that was a fun year for the Raptors. I will say last year, so I have them a lot higher in wins, about 4 more than Vegas, but then even last year when they were 27-45, everyone had the bubble year, the Mickey Mouse championship for the Lakers, and then they got to go home.
Are we calling it that? Are we committing to it being a Mickey Mouse championship? I personally, Lakers fandom notwithstanding, I don't know if I want to call it that. Maybe it's the toughest ring anyone's ever won. Who's to say?
I did love the bubble
Gotcha.
as much as I missed the crowds and I missed the live atmosphere. The bubble was just different kind of game, and obviously the Nets did not do the greatest, and Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, they didn't make the trip, so it wasn't as much fun for me to watch there. But everyone got to go home. The Raptors unfortunately relocated.
Everyone did
Florida.
Get to go home. Yes.
Yeah.
They did not keep them in the bubble forever. They weren't like, if you lose in the bubble, you lose in real life. This wasn't some like Sword Art Online shit. No one got killed. Daniel House's marriage fell apart, I think. I think the bubble probably had a pretty negative effect on his wife's opinion of him. But
could anyone blame the guy? Stuck in a bubble. I'm sure many NBA players said the same thing. Daniel
he straight up he told his family not to visit so that he could have like an insta thought in the bubble with him. Maybe not the best idea. I don't know. I've never been a professional basketball player, so I can't speak for what I would do in that situation. Probably wouldn't do that. Probably would play it out a little differently.
In my dreams and when I daydream as I'm shooting every day on a one hoop by myself, I think I'm a professional basketball player. And if I was in a committed relationship, who knows if I would do what Daniel House was doing, but can't really comment. As a single man, bachelor in DC, but
bachelor in loving it. Bachelor in loving it.
Of course. Yeah. Life is great.
Yeah.
More about the Toronto Raptors. So they've had a few tough seasons. They don't really have an offensive identity. Kyle Lowry just left, which could be, I know Vince Carter had troubles when he left. Kawhi was the one and done, but he brought him a championship. Toronto does, I can say have a long history because 1995 was a few years ago. But, with Pascal Siakam not really making that leap to elite all NBA type player, but still being an all-star two-way player, they just kind of lost their identity a bit last season. Van Fleet was shooting up threes. They were a very good three-point shooting team. They were 4th overall in the league in three-point attempts. And in three-point percentage, middle of the pack 15. But they were jacking them up. It's just the way that the league is going and the trends that they're going today. And on a bright note, I think this season does look very good for the Raptors because Scotty Barnes looks awesome. He had a really good, with the exception of me picking them as to finish in last place at the
right. They're going to have a good season. They're going to lose a lot of games, and they're definitely not going to make the playoffs with that kind of record. But good year to look forward to. Although, actually, would you say you think you got them at 39 wins?
I got them at 39 wins. So
that might make the playoffs in the East. I know everyone we're not in the like early 2000s like Nets making the finals days of the East where like
love those
38
years.
Wins made the playoffs. We're not in those days anymore. But the East does consistently have lower win totals making the playoffs, and they also, because there's just such a minimal divide between the top teams and the middling teams, you do end up having a couple teams that are hovering right around 500 who might be, a little bit more talented but they're like, they play to their opponents. It was the Wizards' problem for a lot of years, right? They would play like contenders against contenders, and they would play like absolute dog shit when they were playing like the Magic or the Hawks of those years or whatever. So, I don't think 39 wins is going to make the playoffs, especially with like the top 6 in the East these days being pretty strong. But crazier things have happened. It's definitely something the East was known for at one point.
Yeah, and especially with the play-in game, they might not make the top 8 right away, but they could have a chance to still get a playoff spot. And there are, I would say though, the biggest issue with those, mid to late 2000s Wizards teams was probably LeBron James.
Yeah, yeah. I would say the biggest issue was how those teams were constructed and how our front office worked. I would say the biggest thing in the way of those teams succeeding in spite of themselves was LeBron James. Yeah, like we had stupidly built rosters. I say we. I am also a Wizards fan. Stupidly built rosters, a bad front office, bad coaching, pretty much everything bad together. But we had hyper talented players that were able to drag us to 40 to 45 wins, and then they would run up against the LeBron James first Cavs stint buzzsaw. Mm-hmm. And that was that was what he was doing to everybody at the time.
Yeah, and
what he was doing. It's been doing to everybody his entire career. He does it in the West now.
And the Wiz, they did have plenty of years where they got past the first round. They were typically that like 4 or 5 seed, but then just running into the Cavs was always trouble. And LeBron didn't always lead the Cavs to the number 1 seed because he had like Zildjius Ilgauskas and Eric Snow as his second and third best players. So, he was still carrying those Cavs, but yeah, it's rough. He's the GOAT for a reason.
Yeah, he's up there. I do want to stop you for a second and just shout out some of our buddies that we've got in the chat right now. Jared, Thomas, Andrew, all you guys. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you hanging out. Hey. Jared, I do apologize. I was shitting on the Wolves a little bit. Didn't realize you had joined the stream yet. Didn't know you were here yet. Thought I was going to get away with that one. Clearly, I did not. Andrew, yes, we're not doing Paladins. We're not doing a video game stream. We're doing the Give and Go show, as you can see on your screen. Me and MJ Tinos talking basketball. Appreciate you being here as well. And I saw Thomas said something about the Washington Generals, a team that is probably better than the Washington Wizards. And Jared also said the Zards won't be able to field a squad on the court this season. I think that's a COVID joke.
Yeah, ha, ha, ha. Which we will talk about that later because the Brooklyn Nets will be talked about as well. So
yes, we will. We will be talking about some of the different rosters, and the Raptors could conceivably sneak some wins. Actually, when you're talking about their win total, they could sneak some wins because I think they're one of the cities, Toronto or just Canada in general, where you do need to be vaccinated or have a negative test in order to travel to them. So there could be a decent number of interdivision, interconference games at home in Toronto that they're stealing, which they already had a home advantage because it's one of the places that's most difficult to travel to.
Yeah.
So the home team is going to have, now that they're not playing in Florida anymore, they're going to be in a good spot. But now also noting that there could be rosters like the Wizards, like the Nets, like the Warriors that are going to be I guess not the Warriors at this point.
Well, shout out to Andrew Wiggins. He did get
big
vaccinated.
Shout out to Andrew Wiggins. So. Yeah, he'll come up on the pod later when I'm talking about the Dubs.
As much as he was giving everyone grief, he did get vaccinated, so I'll give him credit.
Andrew says that's why you're taking the over, and I think that might be a big part of it. If they sneak out 3 or 4 wins from COVID depleted rosters, I mean, they're doing what they can with what they're given. I can't be mad at them about it.
I do like that. I will say though, Pascal Siakam is recovering from his I think it was a torn labrum in his left shoulder, so he'll be back early to mid-November. Okay. I'd hopefully everyone is vaccinated by then. I think that the NBA is one of those leagues that they could probably get their closest to being 100% vaccination rate. They've always been ahead of the curve when it comes to being a player.
I think they're hovering around 90 to 95 right now.
Already, which like the NFL, I don't even know if they're at 80% with.
Well, it helps. It helps how much smaller the rosters are. Yeah. And there's a much more personal relationship, I think, between the GMs and the coaches and the players. And also, like, again, because the NBA is a superstar-driven league, and the superstars have not been great about it in every case. Like the LeBron James and Bradley Beals of the world have not been great about it. But if Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic or whoever or Jimmy Butler says, yo, don't fuck this up for us, you got to get vaccinated, you're gonna listen to the guy who's making $35 million a year next season, because they're gonna have a lot more power on whether or not you continue to have an NBA career or if you're gonna get frozen out.
Yeah, and I mean, just look at DeAndre Jordan literally making $10 million to be on the Nets roster.
Yeah.
It's because
to stand around and do fucking nothing. Yeah. I mean, like, he might be cheering on the bench, he might be waving that towel. I don't know, but good for him. I wish I was 7 foot and hyper athletic for a few years in my prime, but
that would be nice.
I'm neither of those things.
So just to wrap up the Raptors here, I'll just go over their projected starting five and then some of the reserves they got.
Sure.
Projected starters right now, we got Goran Dragic, point guard, Van Fleet at the shooting guard, OG Anunoby, who he's been one of those players like with Siakam, just a beast. They got a lot of length. They're, he's really aggressive, an amazing defender, and can still shoot around 40% from three. So just having those 3-and-D type guys is super to have. Pascal Siakam, I talked about before, dude's a straight up like two-way all-star, really good defense. And then you'd wish that he'd make the improvement. I think having like Kawhi as the alpha really helped him in his development. But I still think that he could get there and has room to grow. Dude's still really young.
Do you think Siakam is going to take that Giannis style jump where he's a primary ball handler and is also putting up all world defense?
No, I mean, Giannis is in his own league. I think I don't really.
Because I think that was the comp that people were pretty hopeful about, just on physical dimensions and the kind of slashing game that they both have. I mean, I don't think Siakam's going to get there, but I also don't think that's a knock on Siakam to not be Giannis. Like, people want to hate on Giannis, but he's one of the most impressive athletic specimens that's ever existed in the league. And yeah, you want to say he's not clutch, you want to say this, you want to say that, but look at the numbers that he put up in the finals last year against a Suns team that wasn't able to stop him. He put up historically great numbers on historically great efficiency with a team that had a lot of scorers on it. So on a team that didn't necessarily need him to do that. So all this to say, if Siakam ends up being, 70% of that, that's a 10-year all-star kind of player. Like that's the kind of guy who's going to be on top of the league for a while.
And it's the ceiling of players' potential is it gets tough to compare them because like Brandon Ingram's comp when he came out was Kevin Durant. And like Brandon Ingram to his own right is still a very good player. Like he
does not play like Kevin Durant.
He does not play like Kevin Durant.
They saw tall, skinny, weird proportions, and they were like, "That's Kevin Durant." Of course, that's Kevin Durant. Who else would that be?
Let's take him. And I mean, he's been good.
He's an all-star. He's a super talented player.
Zion is done with not making the playoffs, so I'm pretty excited. We're not talking about the Pelicans, but he's one of those players that is just like Shaq comparables when it comes to his numbers in the league. But
let's also remember what happened last time somebody said that. I believe Devin Booker said, "I'm done not making the playoffs," and the next year they won 20 games. Now Devin Booker's been to the finals. But right after Devin Booker said, I'm done missing the playoffs, when they won like 35 games or something, they then proceeded to win far fewer games. So
maybe
Zion, get your conditioning under control. Griffin, build a roster that makes a lot of sense for that team instead of just throwing random players together. Like, I don't know why Steven Adams was ever on that team. We're not talking about the Pelicans. They just frustrate me. It's just a frustrating team.
Now, to go with the reserves for the Raptors, and I forgot, shout out to Kem Birch. He had 12 points per game on 56% shooting, only 6'9", but a lot of those Raptors they're the bigger guys are just the tall, lengthy comps, the players that you want to see now. Key reserves, shout out coolest names. We got Malachi Flynn. I've just always been a fan of the name Malachi.
Name.
I don't know why.
It's a good name. Well, it's a little bit like Matt, I guess. It's like a much cooler version of Matt.
I don't want to say that, but
I would say that. I would say that.
Pretty cool M name.
Yeah.
Gary Trent Jr., who came over from Portland, started off hot, sort of cooled down, but I still think he's a really good player and a key piece. Scotty Barnes, who he's a reserve right now, but I could easily see him working his way into more minutes. Definitely working his way into the starting lineup. We got Precious Achiuwa, another cool name.
Right.
And yeah, he was a rookie last year. Like you were talking about with development, this is probably going to be a development year for the Raptors. And then we got Chris Boucher, shot blocker, 3-point shooter, same kind of thing. He struggled as the season went on last year, but another kind of like good 3-and-D guy, which is what the league's looking for this year. I still think it's going to be an exciting season for the Raptors. They have some exciting players. They're going to be in good games. And then if they hover around 500, it can get there. If Siakam comes back strong, I could see them sneaking in the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, there's always a shot in the East, especially if there's key injuries to a couple teams. You've always got the chance that a lot of guys develop during the season and you end up having a crazy year. You've also got situations where you end up like the 60-win Hawks, and maybe your grand total is a lot more than like the sum of your or the sum of your parts is a lot more than what you thought you were going in with. Like you've got a lot of guys who are not traditional all-stars who just happen to click and happen to work together really well. And you might not go deep in the playoffs with a roster like that, because in the playoffs it's a superstars game. Like you're gonna every team needs an ISO guy basically to take you to the promised land. But the Raptors have shown before that they're well coached and they're well built, and they've got a good mix of young guys and vets. So I could see them. I do think you're probably right, and they're in like the 38 to 40 win range. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they ended up being a 50-win team and just taking a lot of games off of teams like the Wizards and the Magic and the Hawks and the Knicks that people going into the season think they're going to lose, because those teams have more traditional superstars. So,
and then even who knows, we'll talk about the Sixers later, but they're still a very good team in their own right. But if you don't have Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid with his injury history, I mean, they have a lot of question marks too.
Yeah. They're a team that could be the top of the conference, or if Joel Embiid gets hurt and Tobias Harris becomes your number one option, you're topping out at like 35 wins, I think. Like, yeah, they've got a team built around Embiid and Simmons, and without one or two of those guys, they go from being contenders to being pretenders really quickly.
Hey, Griffin, you think we have time for a quick ad break?
We sure do. Let me throw an ad break up. I also do want to shout out Larva. Thanks for being here. Appreciate you checking us out. Anybody in the chat right now, appreciate you being here. If you do have Twitch Prime, yeah, you're all good. If you do have Twitch Prime, you're more than welcome to hit that subscribe button. If you don't have Twitch Prime, by all means, don't feel any need to spend any money on us or anything like that. But if you have Twitch Prime and you're not or Amazon Prime, Amazon Prime/Twitch Prime, you're not using it on a streamer right now, would certainly appreciate if you felt the need to use it on us. But if you'd rather hold on to it and use it for somebody else in the future, that's totally fine too. It does go every month, so you have one Twitch Prime subscription every month. While Matt is stepping away, I'm going to run a quick ad break, and we will be back in about a minute. We are back. Okay. Matt's back. We're back. Thank you for hanging out if you're still here past the ad break. I think if you have Turbo or if you're already subscribed through Twitch Prime, you probably wouldn't have gotten that ad. But if you do not have those things, you likely would have gotten that ad. We appreciate you sticking around if you are still here. Matt, you all good on the Raptors? Anything else you want to say about them?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm excited. Scotty Barnes is a really exciting pick. I'm really excited to see kind of how he develops as a player. But, go Toronto. Hey.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say go Toronto because they are frequent rivals with the Wizards, and I generally just don't love their teams. But they, like I said earlier, they're a great development team. I like seeing guys develop on that team. I like watching their games. I just don't root for them in the playoffs. It's the teams that I root for in the playoffs are very limited. With that said, I'm now going to go over to my expectation for the worst team in the Pacific Division. So Matt's got the Raptors for the worst team in the Atlantic Division. My prediction, and I think Vegas's prediction, is that the worst team in the Pacific Division is going to be the Kings. No surprise to anybody. The Kings traditionally are the worst team in that division.
Sorry, Kevin Meekins.
sorry, Meeks. We know you love them. Not sure why you love them, but we know you love them. And part of that, let's be honest about the division. You've got the Suns, you've got the Warriors, you've got the Lakers, and you've got the Clippers. So you have the best team, or tied for the best team of all time in the Lakers. You have the biggest dynasty of the past 10 years in the Warriors. Mm-hmm. You have last year's finals contender in the Suns. And then you have a team that, since Chris Paul got there and the Lob City years in the Clippers, has been a playoff contender every single year. They haven't taken that final jump, and it's one of the things that people kind of make fun of the Clippers for. But you've got four teams in that division that are just going to brutalize the Kings every year because of how poor their roster construction is, and how poor their drafting is, and how poor their front office is. And again, I don't want to upset Kevin Meekins and some of our other buddies, but how poor are their coaches? Their coach is Luke Walton. He's not a good coach.
You want to be cool, don't you?
New subscriber,
I mean,
Ian, thank you so much.
don't you?
Appreciate you being here, man. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I apologize. I will occasionally interrupt the stream to talk about people subscribing or following. But, you know, I do appreciate you being here and for subscribing. Here's the reality with the Kings. You know, last year they finished what did they finish last year? 35 wins, something like that. Not good. They 31 and 41 last year, excuse me. They finished 31 and 41 in the shortened season. So we can kind of expand outward and assume for an 82 game season they probably would have finished around 82 or so wins. And Vegas this year has them set for 35 and a half. I'm taking the under on that. Like I and we'll talk through their roster, we'll talk through their pace, we'll talk through the way they play, but I feel like we go through this every year where we're like, this is the year the Kings are going to take the next step, and every year the Kings wake up and they're like, nah, I don't feel like it. Like who has time to do that? I'd rather just kind of collect my paychecks and have my bad coach and my bad front office and not draft guys like Luka Doncic, despite them being available, and instead get Marvin Bagley. Like. They make organizationally inept decisions that curse them for 5-year periods. And in the NBA, unless you're able to trade these guys who are average to not good, those 5-year decisions fuck you for a really long time. All this being said, I do think the Kings are going to be at the bottom of the division. I think it's pretty likely that they'll be at the bottom of the division, chaos notwithstanding. I do think they're probably going to be around 32 to 33 wins. Last year, they had the worst defense in basketball, historically awful defense in basketball in terms of how many points per game they were giving up. And the Kings, you know, they actually had a lot of comparison points to the Wizards, where they were scoring a lot of points per game, and they were playing at a fairly insane pace. You know, they were top 10 in pace. They were top 12 in points per game, which for a very bad team, it's pretty good.
They did score a lot. Yeah.
They're scoring a lot, but they're not scoring efficiently, and they're giving up a ton of points. They're like, if you're scoring 115, that's all well and good. But if you're giving up 125, what the fuck is the point? Like, what are you doing?
Second to last, 28th of 30th.
Yeah.
Defense.
And I think for the majority of that season, they were 30th of 30th. And then some guys got rested down the stretch on some injured teams. The Kings were bad. They weren't showing anything on defense, both scheme-wise or on an individual player basis. You know, I will say, I think this year they might be a little bit better. They were an awful rebounding team. This year they acquired Tristan Thompson, who, for all of his flaws as a basketball player, you know, he's not a good scorer. He can't put the ball on the ground. If you're married to him, he's going to cheat on you. He can get boards. You know, that's what he does. And he's the definition of board man gets paid. You know, he's the kind of guy who can get you a bunch of offensive rebounds and can provide value that way.
Hey, they got Harrison Barnes.
They got Harrison Barnes. That, you know, Harrison Barnes paid like a superstar, plays like a third option. You know, he's going to give you a good number of points, and he's going to do it efficiently, but he's going to play within himself too much. You know, he's never going to take over games unless he's just really hot from three, which does not occur that often. And he's not the kind of guy that should be getting paid like a first option. Like, if you're paying him like a first option, you're not going to win that many games. Sorry to say. So,
well, because I was listening to stuff about the Bulls too, and it's like the question of building around like a Zach LaVine. Like, there are certain guys that you want to build around. I mean, Bagley shows promise as a center; he was good, but like, how do you not pick Luka there? Which it sucks for Marvin Bagley to have to be like that guy that just wasn't Luka Doncic in that draft, or wasn't Trae Young in that draft, but
or even DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah. So just, it's really rough. And then just being in Sacramento is not the great, you know, place. The names that pop to me on here are De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield, which, you know, are exciting guys, but I just feel like being in Sacramento, unfortunately, like, hurts their development. Fox is always a guy every year that flashes. I see him on SportsCenter. I'll look at the highlights. He's a really good talent, but when you're, you know, defensively as a team, just terrible. You can score a lot, but when you're scoring, when you're down 15, what's the point? You know, it's just, and with the Warriors getting Clay back, I could legit see like the Lakers, Warriors, Clippers, and Suns all being like top 6 in the West this year. And those are the guys that the Kings have to play with in their division. It's rough.
Yeah, I mean, so De'Aaron Fox, great example of a guy who, and for a lot of people, it's still kind of the comp. A lot of guys compare him to John Wall, especially earlier in his career when he was going downhill all the time, and he was dishing it out, and he was scoring at not great efficiency, but at a high enough pace that it didn't really matter. But the difference between John Wall up to 2016 or 2017 or so versus De'Aaron Fox, that John Wall used to have really good hands, and John Wall was always in passing lanes, and John Wall understood the team defense and had the defensive people around him to kind of hide him a little bit while being a decent defender. I mean, he's I think his reputation as a defender was always a little bit overblown because he got good at a number of steals, and he kind of like Dwayne Wade was fantastic at getting weak side blocks. But he also had the personnel around him to hide him, whereas De'Aaron Fox does not. There are very few good defenders on this team, and it's a team that's largely made up of guards and centers. They don't have a lot of like in-between guys that can cover multiple positions. And so the big question is, how is this team going to win games against contenders? Yeah, they might take games off the nobodies or the people resting their starters or whatever, but there's nothing that they're really that good at in comparison to the rest of the league. Honestly, I said 33 wins. I might talk myself out of it. They're going to get 33 wins on talent, but on fit and on play style and on coaching, they could be closer 29-30. And I could end up being wrong about this. They could gel in a really positive way. Buddy Hield's a guy that you had mentioned briefly who is going to be a really important guy for this team because A, he gets paid a fuck ton of money, and you need to contribute if you're getting paid that much. But B, Buddy Hield as a starter, and the stats show this, as a starter is not the guy that you want to have the ball all the time. But as a bench player, as a six-man, Buddy Hield could be one of the best six-men in the league if you put him in that role and if he accepts that role and he's willing to be that kind of guy.
And he's a great catch and shoot guy. Like
he's a great catch and shoot guy. He shoots about 40% from three. He shoots it at a high clip. He shoots it at a great efficiency. He can defend somewhat because he's long. He's not super laterally quick, and he's not super athletic. He's not jumping in front of guys. But with the right team defense around him, he's the kind of guy who can be a part of a whole. And if guys 1 through 5 are defending at a good level, he's going to get some stops. But if you've got everyone on the team acting like a turnstile, except for, Tristan Thompson or Marvin Bagley or something like that, what he's not going to be the guy to stop that. I think Richaun Holmes also going to be a good defender, but is he going to be their starting center, or are they going to ask him to play power forward? Is he going to score it all, or are they going to expect their guards to do the bulk work of that? I don't know. The Kings roster it's poorly built. It's very confusing. I don't see what their path forward is outside of getting another draft pick that they're going to blow.
I don't think I would ever use them in 2K.
Yeah, unless you're doing like starters only and you're like, I just want to go downhill with Fox the entire game. Why would you? Like, there's nothing about that roster that jumps out and is like, this is a super unique, special team that's really good at something. They're going to play fast, but are they going to play efficient? And are they going to get stops? If they can do that, if they can play fast and they can keep the efficiency even at league average, and they can if they can be league average in defense, they're going to be a 40-win team. But I don't see that happening because that between 28th and 15th, the difference in the amount of points they're going to give up is monstrous.
And I don't even think 40 wins is enough. Like, just with
no, they're not going to make the playoffs. Let's be clear about that. The Kings are not going to make the playoffs.
For those five teams you mentioned, yeah.
In 9 months, if they make the playoffs, you guys are welcome to come back and be like, Griffin, how embarrassed are you right now? But they're not going to, so I'm not going to be. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Death taxes and the Kings are not making the playoffs.
It's been 15 years. The last time they made the playoffs, they were like a championship contender. They were going up against other championship contenders in the West, like the Lakers, and arguably,
Vlade Divac was a player back.
Yeah, right. That's God. I couldn't even talk the last time they were in the playoffs. But I'm 29.
Got the Mike Bibby, Peja Stojakovic, Jason Williams, Vlade Divac. I mean, they had their time, and I think the refs did screw them because they wanted the Lakers to be in the finals. But that was
I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made about it. I don't want to get into it too much because again, I kind of bleed the purple and gold. But yeah, there's definitely a likelihood that things were fixed, and one day I'd like people in the NBA to let us come to games for free as media members. So I'm gonna stop talking about this now.
That would be pretty cool. I would not hate that.
All right, let's jump back to the Atlantic Division. Who do you have finishing fourth? Or, if you got like a third, fourth kind of thing going, by all means.
Fourth place finish. Last year, it was the Celtics. This year, I do have the Knicks finishing fourth place. Knicks coached by Tom Thibodeau. They got a roster of Kemba, Evan Fournier, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, with Mitchell Robinson as center. Reserves, we got Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, Obi Toppin, and Nerlens Noel. I mean, seeing those names, those guys are already probably the 10 best players that would be on the Kings roster. In the draft,
at least in name value alone, I mean, some of them are got a couple guys that are a little old and a couple guys that are a little too young, but yeah, they're. If the Knicks and the Kings competed against each other for 82 games, the Kings are probably losing 60 games.
Yeah. And, Knicks are a storied franchise founded in 1946. They're a little starving, though.
They got history lesson.
Hey, I've been doing my research.
Yeah, man.
You got the championships in 70 and 73, though. So, man, the Knicks have been they're the media darling. They're literally with the Lakers as ESPN, the team that's always talked about. They want them to be so good, so bad. But unfortunately, Kevin Durant did not want to come to your team.
Well, what is it? They always say. They always say when the Knicks are good, the NBA is better. And the problem is the Knicks are so rarely good. That the NBA, I'm sure everyone else in the NBA is like, yo, just figure your shit out. Like Dolan, just like stop messing with front office decisions. Let your front office run the team. And he's costing a lot of other teams a lot of money. If they were better, then
Oh yeah, and like the Garden. Fun fact: like Kemba is played and is the best version of Kemba when he plays in the Garden. I guess he has the best games there. So it is pretty cool that Kemba's going to be playing there in his home court now. Last year they finished with a record of 41-31. Vino's chiming in because he's not a fan of the Knicks right now. I agree. I have him going 40-42. Vegas has him as 42.5. Again, though, close to 500. I mean, they finished fourth in the Eastern Conference last year. They got, let's take a look at some of their other stats here since I have them pulled up. Where's my Knicks?
While Matt's looking at that, I apologize anybody watching the live stream right now that heard Vino barking. But now you know where Vino is. If you were looking for him, I know Jared was looking for him. He says he loves b-ball. He loves baseball a little bit more, I think, because he spent more time watching baseball than b-ball because the Lakers didn't have the year I wanted, the Wizards didn't have the year I wanted, but he's gonna be a basketball dog this year, and so hopefully the comes to an end.
So the Knicks were definitely one of the slower teams. The Knicks, they were literally 30th of 30 in pace, and it does not make sense looking at their stats. Points per game 107, which is 26th in the lead. Opponents' points per game 104. So they actually had the number one defense in the league with opponents' points per game. Tom Thibodeau is the coach. He's not resting starters. Literally Julius Randle. And I think in the playoffs last year, part of the problem was those guys were so gassed. As soon as they got to the playoffs, they were just incredibly gassed. And a cool percentage here.
A guy like Julius Randle, his style is incredibly taxing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just keep feeding him the ball and making him he's going to get you wins with that style because a lot of teams are not able to stop it. He's basically like a top all over the court, just spinning around, getting past guys. But by the time the playoffs get there, he's wiped. His lower body can't take the load. His cardio can't take the load. And maybe Kemba takes that pressure off of him a little bit, but
with Kemba too, the reason why I have them, finishing not as good as they did last year, because last year they finished 41-31. They were literally 10 games above 500, overachieved, and They had a really good young squad. RJ Barrett is coming on. Like, I think there are a lot of bright points in this team, but I just think, Kemba Walker, is he really going to give him that boost on offense? He didn't play any back-to-backs last year. I can't really see him doing that again this year. He's going to be, resting throughout the season just because he's 31. Fournier has surprised me. He played really well with Boston last year, so he could provide something from them. He shot 46% from three last year, so he was still doing really well, even with struggling at the end of the year. He was one of the guys that got COVID, so he was one of those athletes that were impacted by it. And, Nerlens Noel, I think just as they have a lot of defenders, especially with Robinson and him. Emmanuel Quickly is a guy who's making a big impact. He's 47% on catch and shoot threes. I love D Rose, and it seemed like he kind of had a revival and is going into his role where
Very
he knows
much
he can't
so.
be the same Derrick Rose,
Yeah.
but he can still get buckets. He's still watching him shoot game-winning shots last year was one of the coolest things ever, just because it's Derrick Rose at times is still Derrick Rose, and he hasn't changed. He's changed his mindset. He knows he can't do the things that he used to do, but he's still a really exciting player.
Derrick Rose, a guy that everyone said was going to have A, the style that aged the worst, and B, they thought he was already done because even outside of aging, he had catastrophic injuries that basically made him a G League level player for a few years, and he's completely changed his game. He's not all about the quick acceleration and acceleration anymore. He's not getting up anymore. You're not looking for him to yam it on guys, but he's become a much improved shooter. He's become a much improved ball handler, and he's developed a bit of a floor general game where he's much slower to act, but he's making the right reads, and he's setting picks for guys.
Yeah, and it was brutal. I remember when Derrick Rose first came back from his knee injury, and then immediately he got hurt after. It was just brutal to watch. Felt so bad for the guy because of all the work that you put in. And, I sprained my ankle and I get upset at some of the things I can't do. I could not jump like Derrick Rose, one of the coolest high school mixtapes of all time. Him and John Wall, definitely ones that I think of when I was on YouTube, and probably going to watch it after this.
Who's got a great high school mixtape? Who's probably gonna piss you off? Who pisses me off every day? Grayson Allen. Grayson Allen has an insane high school mixtape.
Is it him tripping all the
Grayson
players?
Allen, low key, and I'm gonna make a lot of jokes about coach's son and
the legit Duke,
the guy's
player,
a freak
though.
of nature. He can jump out of the gym. He's a dunk contest kind of guy.
Yeah, he does play really good minutes. I mean, because Grayson Allen's on the Jazz, right?
Is he still on the Jazz, or is he on the Wolves now or something? He was on the Jazz because nothing made more sense than Grayson Allen on the Jazz. I want to say he's on the Wolves now, though. Maybe he's on the Bucks. No, there's no chance he's on the Bucks. Oh, he's on the Bucks. Yeah.
There we go. Well, I knew DiVincenzo.
That's
was
another
on there,
pretty
so,
white
yeah.
white area, so they're probably pretty pleased about it. Yeah, he was never on the Wolves. I don't know why I thought he was on the Wolves. He was on the Grizz for a little bit.
That's okay. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that might be what I'm thinking of. Yeah, on the Bucks. Thanks, Jared. Appreciate you shouting that as well. Same time I got to it on Wikipedia. Appreciate you, buddy. Maybe the third man on the pod one of these days if we want to keep this whole Lily White thing going.
NBA talk, yeah.
Yeah.
So a cool little stat though with the Knicks. They're very good at shooting from three, but they don't shoot a lot. So they were actually top 10 in 3-point percentage, third in the league, but bottom 10 in shots from three, which I think just has a lot to do with what kind of style of pace they play.
Sure.
How many of those just came off of offensive rebounds potentially because the Knicks are that we're going to get points in the post. We're going to, run our half court offense and try to work the ball around and look for shots that way. But Knicks are exciting. Like I said, I could see them they have a good roster. I think if Kemba can rest and provide that offensive spark that they need, if RJ Barrett takes a leap, Julius Randle, just keep doing what you're doing. You're an all-star. You've been balling. He was one of the guys last year that I was it's really cool to see him just make that leap. I remember people were clowning the Knicks when they signed him. It was oh, the Knicks didn't get KD, they didn't get Zion, they didn't get anybody, and they get Julius Randle, and people were just going off. And he stepped up and he put work into his game in the offseason and looked really, really good doing it. So I think that they have a really good floor. They're gonna beat a lot of bad teams, and that's why I think they'll stay around 500, which again in the East is probably good enough to sneak into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think they might end up being a play-in game kind of team, which at that point, you get hot at the right time. You maybe do a little bit of damage because they've got a roster that can do some damage in the playoffs. They've got guys that can shoot the three ball. They've got guys that can work inside. They've got ball handlers. They've got defensive talents. Are they going to make it super far in the playoffs? No, I think they're probably at best a second round exit if they win a play-in game. But there's talent on the roster and there's a lot of veteran experience at this point. And yeah, like you said about Julius Randle, people were clowning them for a long time. People have really clowned all of the former Lakers kids acquisitions like as they've gone elsewhere. They clown Brandon Ingram, they clown Randall, they clowned Lonzo, they clowned D'Lo.
Yeah.
And all of those guys are at the very worst talented starters, and at best between each of them, all-stars too in Randall's case or Randall and Ingram really, if things continue to work out for them, if they keep getting better, they're all NBA level players. I don't know if they're consistent all NBA level guys, but they're the kind of guys that could win it one or two times, or could be like third team one or two times. That's so much better than what people said about them when they were on the Lakers. And a lot of that is just like Lakers bias. You expect guys to be Kobe for all intents and purposes. You want them to be Kobe, you want them to be Shaq, you want them to be whoever, Kareem, Magic. Yeah, like you just expect if a guy is on the Lakers and they're a star, that they're a star all the time. But sometimes it takes longer than that. And sometimes the expectations, they're a little bit too much. And I'm glad that he's thriving in New York because I think that he always had it in him. And I think they're probably going to accomplish not a lot with him, but they're going to be a playoff team for a number of years. And so I am looking forward to seeing what the Knicks do this year. Not a team that I like. I particularly hate their uniforms. I think they've got ugly-ass unis, and I don't know why people stand for them so hard.
Yeah, I'm not going to watch them too much. And,
yeah, well, you're a Nets guy, so you have actual beef with them, whereas I'm just like, not a team that really not a team that gets me going. Like they're
kind of like the Yankees of the Mets. I'm a Mets guy. I'm a Mets jersey Nets.
Sure,
guy,
sure. They're a Yankees in terms of like popularity.
Yeah,
but the Lakers are the Yankees in terms of success. I would even potentially say the Yankees are the Lakers of baseball. I don't know.
I mean, you got Boston too, which again we're starving for.
Okay, can we not? Can we not? Like let's talk about this right now before we even like get any further on this. The Lakers win every decade. Boston wins every 30 years, and the majority of their titles came from 60s. An 8-team league. Like, get the fuck out of here. Every single person that asked Bill Simmons, everybody at Barstool, like everyone that's like, oh no, I hate the Lakers, I hate LeBron James, but I love the Celtics. Your takes
going
are
off
bad.
On Bill Simmons?
Like if Bill Simmons wants to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it. The Celtics are a historically great franchise, yes, but they are not a currently great franchise. Whereas the Lakers are both.
Our NBA threads, dude, don't get me started. Like every time the Celtics, they hate on the Nets so hard, and they were talking so much shit to the Nets, and it's just so nice to like throw it back in their face. And I mean, especially with KD signing his deal, Harden I think is going to follow suit. Kyrie, who knows what's going on? Championship window is pretty extended right now. I think this is the year that they're going to do it, but they're just so nice that the Celtics are going to be, we'll talk about them later, but, Jason Tatum I really like, Jaylen Brown I really like.
Sure, great,
they have
great
a lot
talents.
of guys and good young talent, but yeah,
I like Brad Stevens. Like I like their roster. I like their talent. I like Marcus Smart. I like a lot of guys that have gone through that roster, but like they act like the early the late 2000s championship team. They act like it was a dynasty. They won one title. Like, you're not the Warriors, you're not the Spurs, you're not the Lakers. You didn't do any, like, you have one title since 9/11. Come on.
And they talk about how...
And everyone knows 9/11 changed everything.
They hate on super teams so much, but yet you could argue that they were one of the first super
originators
teams.
of the super team. They're the originators. Because
back
Kevin
in the
Garnett
60s, they were too. But
specifically... to go, but at that point, like everyone was a super team essentially.
Just because you said it was literally like 8 teams,
Kevin Garnett agreed to go to the Celtics because of how they were built, And the reason that the Wolves traded into the Celtics specifically is because they were doing their old pal Kevin McHale a favor. That's a super team. Just because it happened through a trade rather than free agency doesn't stop it from being a super team. Like, there's no right way to build a super team. There's no wrong way to build a super team. A super team is a super team. Like, it just is what it is. You put multiple All-Stars or all NBA players together on a team that did not get drafted by that team, that's a super team.
And they definitely weren't their primes, but I would argue they were like
Close.
not heavy on the decline.
They were
either.
not heavy.
Like
they went on a decline because they went deep in the playoffs for 4 straight years.
Yeah, and then they also went to the Nets, which is one of the biggest, I think, mistakes that they ever did. But again, we'll talk a little bit about the Nets later. But literally, you can give up all of your picks to get superstar players, and then just like what the Nets did this year, they traded into the draft by trading Landry Shamet, and they got your boy Cam Thomas, who's nasty and he's so good. And like, even teams like, no matter what, you're giving up all of these picks. Who cares if you can then trade vets and get picks and buy right into the draft again? Like, I think picks and you get Luka, you do have guys at the top that are good, but those are the lottery team picks. If you're a good team, and I think the Nets are trying to build that same thing that the Lakers have, where everyone is always trying to come to the Lakers. It doesn't matter. You get drafted somewhere else.
5 or 6 teams
going to the Lakers.
Exactly. You've got 5 or 6 teams that really have no excuse not to compete on a regular basis because of where they're located. You've got the LA teams, you've got the New York teams, you've got Miami. There's probably 1 or 2 that, I mean, I guess to an extent, if you're like in the Silicon Valley mood. Yeah, if you're in the Silicon Valley mode, you're kind of thinking Warriors too, especially the recent Warriors. Yeah. I know that was a big reason why Iguodala went there. But those teams have no excuse to be year in, year out lottery teams because guys are always going to want to go play there and they're always going to want to team up there. And people talk about how great it is to play in Philly. No, it's not. It's great to play in New York and it's great to play in LA and it's great to live in Miami.
Who says it's great to play in Philly? Who's that Philly source?
Sports fans, Philly sports fans, anecdotally. So let's take it with a grain of salt. But they're like, we're the best fans in sports, and it's like, no, you're not.
Shout out to Thomas Albert.
Yeah, like Thomas isn't only like a 1-team Philly fan. Like he's not even a real he's a real Philly fan. I'm not gonna say that. But
him and Nick Perugini, the only Eagles fans I respect. But
if Thomas had to be a 4-team Philly fan, if he had to be Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, and Sixers, I mean, he would have hung himself. Because it's not a great team to be a fan of. I apologize for saying that. Probably
the next
leave that one out on the YouTube video.
Awesome.
Whatever. We all know I'm kidding. I'm the one with the stupid wrist tattoos. Let's move on. Let's move on to my Pacific. Let's just brush past it. Let's move on to my team that I think is going to be the second worst in the Pacific Division.
Thomas hasn't logged off, right? He's still.
I don't know if he's still here or not. I don't know. He might be listening. He might not be. He might be napping. He might be on the golf course. Who knows with that kid? Let's move on to my team that I think is going to be the second worst in the division, and this is actually one that disagrees with the Vegas odds. Vegas odds would tell you that it's going to be the Clippers, which makes a lot of sense because of key injuries to Kawhi Leonard in particular. I think it's going to be the Warriors. Vegas has them winning 48.5 games. They have them being top 4, top 5 in the conference. And I think there's a lot of things that need to go right for them to actually hit that win total. And I think with the age of a lot of the stars on their team, because they are a pretty star-studded roster, I think there's just as much chance that a lot of things are going to go wrong. You've got good young talent. Damian Lee, he's fine. James Wiseman, he's not good right now, but he's potentially going to be great.
Yeah. He got a lot of unfair hate last year, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Gary Payton II, a guy that I really wanted the Wizards to sign, had a really good G League run. He's not his father, but he's a good prospect talent. And then you've got Jordan Poole, another young guy who's going to do a lot. And then you've got the guys that we expect. You got Draymond Green, you got Klay Thompson coming back, you've got Steph Curry, and I think Iguodala's back on the team. I think he re-signed with them because that's where he wants to. Yeah, it's where he wants to finish his career. Here's the thing with those guys, though. every single one of those guys is on the wrong side of it 30 with an injury history. Iguodala, not a regular player anymore. Like he's an 18 to 20 minute
He's probably going to sit back to backs too. I could see him doing that.
He's the guy that you have on the team for playoffs and for a vet presence. Klay Thompson been out for a year and a half. It worked for Kevin Durant, but is it going to work for Klay Thompson? Do we know that he's got a game that if it does work, it's going to age perfectly. But what if it doesn't?
Also
what if
Kevin
he
Durant
re-aggravates
is
the
7
injury?
foot tall? Yeah, even people were saying it's his non-jumping Achilles. I mean, modern medicine in general is just freaking incredible.
It is insane.
Baseball and just every sport, when you talk about the injuries that were literally career enders and the player's never the same now. Even Derrick Rose, when he got hurt, if that happened 5 years later, you could argue that his recovery would have been better and he would have looked like a different player. But I don't know. I'm closer to Vegas in thinking about the Warriors because I do think that, Steph Curry is still Steph Curry. He looked great. Your arguments are valid, though, because in the West, it's so stacked that you need to rack up wins in the regular season. It could be hard. Steph Curry was a guy that was hurt before he got his contract. The reason why the Warriors were able to form those, not gonna lie, I was also hating on KD at the time.
Him and Draymond, they both had super undervalued contracts.
Yeah, and it's because Curry could not stay healthy and his ankles were just so brittle and he would just get hurt and sprain them all the time and he could not stay healthy. And he was even hurt, I think, some games last year. He played really well to close the season out, but
and I think he was hurt a little bit the bubble season as well.
Yeah, so if you have all those guys, that's great, but I don't think missing one of those pieces is not going to win you games against anybody in this division besides the Kings. And
it's worth noting that they've picked up, and they picked up Wiggins last year, but they also got Otto Porter. They've got Wiggins, a guy who can be an ISO scorer, who can play above league average above league average defense at this point, because he's finally on a team that's learning how to develop him. And Otto Porter is a guy who, if he can stay on the court, he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the league. He's one of the most efficient shooters in the league, and he's a great defender. But he doesn't. He was on the Bulls, but he can't stay on the court. And he's a younger guy. He's probably 27, 28. I'm not exactly sure how old he is. I remember him, somewhat fondly from his Wizards years, and I watched some of his Bulls years.
So they
thought he was going to be a big deal. He was hurt all the time. And
him and Ariza in those Wizards years.
Yeah.
Nice.
And there was at one point there was not a big 4, but a big 2 plus a medium 4 with Brad and John and Otto and Oubre, and also Markieff Morris, and they had Death Row DC.
That's when
it was a fun lineup, but all those guys had
in that playoffs.
Yeah. All those guys had fundamental flaws that got exposed. Otto Porter, A, health, the big one, but B, he's too passive. And I don't know if a passive player is going to work successfully in the Warriors offense. He might be good defensively, and he might, be able to hide a guy like Steph Curry. And if Klay is not as lateral as he used to be, maybe Klay Thompson as well. But what are you going to use him for? Because he's not a Swiss Army knife. You can't put him into any lineup because sometimes he's going to just provide very little value for you.
Because that is a big deal too. With Klay, you're right. The reason why he was so great was he was an elite defender as a shooting guard. During those the 2017 year in the finals with Kyrie, Klay was strapping him. He was the guy that was in charge of guarding their best scorer. Iguodala was guarding LeBron. You can't ask Klay to guard LeBron, but he was still in charge of handling their most talented scorer, and he did a really good job. Klay is an elite defender.
Let's be honest about LeBron defense. It's defense by committee.
Yeah.
Even the guys that are the best at defending LeBron, whether it's Giannis or Kawhi or Paul George sometimes or Jimmy Butler, it's switching and it's putting him up against tough matchups on every play, and it's trying to bring his efficiency down, and you're trying to take other guys out of the game. So you try and make him do it all himself, and at this point he's 37 years old, 36, 37.
Yeah.
It's getting dicey. It's getting progressively harder with every passing year for him to be the superstar who is on the entire game.
And especially since, just so many crazy LeBron stats. If you're tuning in and you're an NBA fan at all, you know this, but he plays an extra season basically every year
Yeah.
because he goes to the end of the playoffs every
Not every
single
year.
year.
Not every year. He doesn't play an extra season every year. He plays an extra season, I think, every 4 years.
From what was it, 2012 to 2020 or something? He like was in the playoffs or finals.
He
every
played
single
2
year.
additional years worth of playoff runs because no
Yeah.
matter what, he's got to do 16 games, right? Even if they sweep their way through. So assume the minimum number of games 16, 16, 32, 48, 64.
Yeah.
That's that's a league shortened season. He was 72 last year, but even regardless, he went 2010 through 2018, missed 2019, then went 2020 to the finals. And then I mean, I guess we can not count the bubble because that was less games in a season. But regardless, he's played through finals seasons, also counting 2007 and some of the Eastern Conference finals he went to and all that. An extra 3 years worth of playoff games, 4 years of playoff games. Like it's unheard of. It's
And
unheard
with the
of.
NBA too, like I feel like in other sports, like baseball might be the quickest turnaround, but I feel like NBA is the second where like the season
season.
ends, summer kind of happens, and I'm already watching summer ball just because I love watching the summer league. And then next thing you know, it's like dudes are in training camp, season's gonna start again. Like there's really like you don't get a lot of time to rest and recover, and that's why everyone Lacoste when he's just coasting through the
Yeah.
season. It's like, yeah, but you want LeBron to be playing and LeBron to be LeBron every game. And I mean, we'll talk about the Lakers later too.
Yeah.
I'm super excited for that team and just to see what they look like with Russ and LeBron, AD, Melo. Like they're going to be a really cool, exciting team. I still think LeBron will be the primary ball handler, but I think with Russ there, he doesn't have to play as much. Literally, the problem with the Lakers last year was whenever LeBron had to come off, like no one could do anything. AD was playing probably the worst basketball that he's played since he's been in LA. And like he wasn't really playing that dominant center role, which I think
that team was not constructed well, especially with the way they were promising minutes to certain guys.
Schroeder.
It was much like many LeBron teams. It's designed with LeBron to be the engine that makes everything else work. Yeah. And when he went down or when he was not at his best, that stopped being the case. We'll talk about them a little bit later. Let's finish up with the Warriors. Vegas has them at 48.5 wins. I've got them at 45 wins. Not significantly below their predictions, but I think they're probably a play-in team in the West, whereas a lot of people have them as being back in that top 6 to top 4 kind of hierarchy. I don't think I could see them if they're healthy going into the playoffs. They're another team. They're much more so than the Knicks were, who we brought up earlier, being a play-in team. The Warriors are the kind of team that if they're resting guys and they get a play-in game and they win that play-in game, they could potentially go to like the Western Conference Finals.
They
have the firepower to blow you out of the gym.
And literally,
do I think it's going to happen? No.
Steph
I
Curry's
think you've got
crap,
too many guys who are getting old, and I think Draymond in particular has fallen off too much to be the guy that he was, where he's, your primary ball handler and he's your defensive anchor all the time because his shooting has regressed, his defense has regressed, his ability to stay on the court has regressed. He's still a fantastic passer and he's still a fantastic floor general, but if you're only getting, 50 to 55 games a year out of Draymond because he's hurt all the time, you're probably going to lose a lot of those other games. Because he like LeBron, he's a Diet Coke LeBron. Like he does a lot of the same stuff and plays a lot of the same positions. And
but he needs to be on top of his game when he's out there. Like he needs to be physical. He needs to be aggressive because he's their best defender when he's on the court too. So
and he needs to hide a guy like Steph Curry, like him being able to switch and Iggy being able to switch. Sorry, he doesn't like the word Iggy. Dre being able to switch and Wiggins being able to switch. Like Curry is not the bad defensive player that a guy like Kyrie Irving is, but you still need to hide him against really good teams. Mm-hmm. And if the guys that would normally hide him are, 80% of themselves, it's not going to work because he's going to get the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what the Cavs are doing too. They were switching on Curry, which he's not,
And they had guys dragging on him every play. And Curry is historically not a guy that gets a lot of calls. He's fantastic at the line, but he doesn't get the calls that other superstars do.
Yeah, so, this season will be an interesting season with the I've already seen preseason highlights where players have tried jumping into the defender and the refs aren't calling it.
It happened with Curry. Curry tried to do it, a guy who doesn't normally do it very much, and they didn't give it to him.
I
And you
hope
know but this does happen every year. For the first like 5 games of the year, they enforce the things that they say they're going to enforce, and then
and
they
then
drop it entirely.
yeah.
Not the first time they've said they're going to change the way defensive and offensive rules are called. We'll see if they stick with it, but it is going to be the kind of thing that affects guys like Curry and Harden and a lot of the undersized point guards in the league, like Kemba, if they're not able to do that anymore.
Well, then watching the Olympics this year too, in the past summer, like when USA was not doing hot in their first exhibition games, it's very frustrating to watch a lot of guys basically try to bait for calls. And it's like, this is what US basketball is now. And it's like, no, like these guys are good enough. Curry has never really been the guy to bait for calls. I think he just started to do it because he knew the refs were going to call it.
And
And
because
I
he
mean,
was missing some of his other offensive players. Like, you're missing Klay
yeah,
Thompson. You got to hurt Draymond.
when you
don't
have to
KD
do it
anymore.
all, go to the line.
And
Like,
he
yeah.
averaged like 35 points for like 2 months. But it's not sustainable for a guy his size.
No. And I think, the Warriors still play, and you have to like factor in Steve Kerr when they're all healthy, when they're moving the ball, especially when you have Clay, Steph, and Dre. They literally like it's poetry in motion watching their offense. The basketball fan in me wants to see them get back to that because I didn't really hate on the Warriors too much until KD got there. Which,
Yeah,
funny enough,
right,
I'm like
agreed.
a fan of the biggest super team ever, but like they were it was so frustrating because every time they threw up a shot, it was going in, and you don't always want them to win, but it was such a fun team to play against. Like that Warriors OKC series in 2016 might be one of the best playoff series in like all of basketball as the Western Conference Finals. Like, and
The
it's just like
2014 through 2016 Warriors, in particular the 2015 and 2016 years, were some of the most fun basketball I've ever watched in my life. It was like especially 2016 when they went on the 73-9 run. They basically were like the 2014 Spurs with the beautiful game offense every single night, but with additional 3-point shooting and with just more like absolute fuck you plays. Like they were just doing stuff that I thought was fictional within the constraints of basketball, and they were doing it nightly. So much fun to watch. And then they
even the
got Kevin
Spurs that
Durant,
year.
and it got
Yeah.
boring. Not only because they were offensively like supercharged at that point, but because they changed their style. They became a much less pass heavy style. They deferred a lot more to KD. They became much more ISO heavy, which is a winning style and is a really fun style if you're closely competitive with other teams. Like a lot of the mid 2000s teams were an ISO heavy style. But if you're just running guys over, ISO ball is not that much fun to watch. Like it
Give
just
it to
gets
Iverson. Give it to Iverson. Have him
yeah,
jack up
or those
50%
mid
of your team
2000s
shots.
Kobe teams. Like, yeah, they were losing
Yeah.
a lot of games, but every single night it was must see TV.
Which I was thinking of just 2016 in general. I remember the last night of basketball that season. It was the Warriors getting 73 wins,
And Kobe's
but it
retirement
was
game.
Kobe's 60-point game. And we started with Kobe, and I wanted to bring up that Wizards Lakers game was one of the coolest basketball experiences I've ever had.
I watched that at a buddy's house, and we were playing 2K beforehand, and we played as the Lakers, and I basically spent the entire time just feeding the ball to Kobe, and I think, like he crushed me, but I think I finished with like 50 some points, even though it was like the oldest broken down Kobe whatever. And then we had the Lakers game on his bigger screen. Shout out 309, that's where we were at. We had the Lakers game on the big screen, and we had the Warriors game on the smaller screen. And honestly, like halfway, the Warriors like blew them out. Like it wasn't even a very competitive game. The Lakers game was a bad game of basketball, but it was probably the most fun I had watching a regular season game that year. It was incredible.
Listen to
and
all the
I
players
cried at
too,
the
like-
end, and I don't apologize for that. Why would I apologize for that?
I think Nick Young was talking about too, how like everyone on the Lakers just knew they were giving the ball to Kobe.
Yeah.
They knew where the ball was going that day.
Yeah.
It was to Kobe Bryant.
Even on a regular day, you know the way to play the game, and especially on his retirement game, like the guy was not going to quit. Do I think the Jazz maybe took it like very slightly easy on him? I think about it sometimes. I don't know if I want to say that because I don't know if any NBA player ever intentionally takes it easy, but I think there was an element of respect in that game where they were not like beating him up too much, especially early on, and then he started getting hot, and then they kind of tried to stop him, and then you know how it goes. You try and stop Kobe.
He was already
it only
hot.
makes him stronger. Once he gets
Yeah.
hot, he stays hot. All that being said, let's head back over to the Atlantic Division. I want to hear who you've got. We've talked enough about the Warriors and about Kobe Bryant, I guess. Not
Let's
a
do
Warriors
it.
player, but, it is what it is. Let's head back
He
to
is
the
a
Atlantic
Warrior.
Division. Who is your number 3 team? Who's going to be right in the middle of that division? Who's in that sweet spot?
Right in the middle. I mean, I still think they're not at the level of a powerhouse, but if things all click, they can be a very good team. That's the Boston Celtics. We hate, or I don't want to say we hate. We hate Boston. I guess.
Oh, do we ever hate Boston? We hate Boston. I mean, like, objectively, yeah, we can talk good things about their team and all that. But from a fan standpoint, we are not Boston fans.
Not a fan.
Not
of
in this
Boston.
house, not in that house.
They didn't have a lot of picks this year. They only drafted one rookie, Juwan Begarin, shooting guard, and I think he's not from here because he doesn't have a school listed. So I think it was an international pick. But they have a new head coach this year, Ime Udoka, who he's been an assistant coach in the league for a while, since 2012. He was first with the Spurs for a bit, coached under Popovich, went to the Sixers, was on the Nets last year. Brad Stevens was the coach, but then he got promoted to GM. I think is he president of basketball operations there?
I think he's president of basketball operations.
So yeah, so he runs everything there, which I think is a great choice because honestly, Brad Stevens is a great coach. If I wasn't already a Nets fan, I think this would be a great situation to be in. Like, Brad Stevens knows what he's doing. They have a lot of good players, a lot of good talent. I mean, they just got Dennis Schroeder, who a lot of players, when they're on kind of like a contract prove it deal, tend to ball out. And I know that Schroeder unfortunately bet on himself and didn't sign a big money contract. Had an
Not the first guy to do so.
Yeah,
but
Victor
I don't feel too bad for him.
Oh, he missed out on so much money. There's a lot of what ifs on guys that kind of got screwed.
Yeah.
But Marcus Smart, who has always been a really, really good defender, but to be honest, every time I watch the Celtics, I'm like, Marcus Smart has a bag. Like, he's just pulling out. There are like plays he does. He's
Smart,
really good offensively. Like, he can go off and. Yeah.
I've got a buddy who is the biggest Marcus Smart supporter I've ever met in my life. But Nico works at Blag, great guy, wonderful human. He's been on the Marcus Smart train for a long time, and one of the big things about Marcus Smart that separates him from a lot of other players is Marcus Smart has absolutely no fear of looking stupid during a game. If Marcus Smart was the kind of guy with a broken free throw form, he's also the kind of guy who would shoot granny style underhand because he doesn't care how he looks. He doesn't care, he just wants to win games. And he's the kind of guy that makes basketball plays constantly to just win games. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a deep three late in the clock, whether it's, pulling up with two guys in his face, whether it's hitting floaters when he can't really get to the rim. Like, He's going for steals. He's going for blocks. He's getting in front of guys. He's defending 3 guys at once somehow because he's all over the court. He's like a fucking whirling dervish. I hate Marcus Smart because he doesn't play for any team that I like, and he constantly makes the teams that I like lose games. But Marcus Smart is 1,000,000% the guy that you hate when he's not on your team, and you worship. You don't love him. You worship him when he is on your team.
That's literally what I was just going to say, because he's the guy that you just look, and when he's not on your team, you're just like, this guy's playing dirty. He's doing all this stuff. He's talking shit, but like, he's a really good guy to have on your team. In Boston, I think they'd call him Marcus Smart. So
yeah, I think they would call him Marcus Smart.
To round up their projected starters.
Good cut there.
They got, 2 of their superstars, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I mean, they're both ridiculous. They both had huge improvements. Jaylen Brown, especially with his efficiency last year. But like, Jason Tatum, in my opinion, is just like a straight up all-star. He already had his game, his MJ versus the Celtics kind of game. Like, he did that against the Nets, won them a game when they had no business winning a playoff game against the Nets last year, like, to be honest. And
he was out of body. Body.
So the fact that he can go into that and be that type of player, I think we're going to see more of him. I do think that guys that play for Team USA too, like, there is something about playing with the best players, and like, everyone was kind of clowning on the team this year that went to Japan, but they were still filled with all NBA players, and just practicing, being around those guys, learning from those guys, that does have an impact. So I see him stepping up. They got Al Horford to round it out, which I know he was on the Thunder last year, I think, but dude was on the Celtics before, right? Like he like left and is now coming back to the
the
Celtics.
Celtics, and then he got moved to the Sixers because the Sixers thought they were going to be able to recreate who he was on the Celtics,
That's
and
right.
it didn't work. It seemed like he was like completely donezo at that point. Like the personnel fit was not great. But I mean, obviously, he had some of his best years on the Hawks. But his two
Yeah.
best teams, I think, in his career thus far have been the Hawks and the Celtics. The Celtics have been able to really get a lot out of him. Obviously, he's a little older now. He's a little slower. He's not the defender that he used to be. He's also not the floor general that he used to be because he's just not. He's not a spectacular athlete.
Yeah.
But he's kind of like a little bit like a Marc Gasol, where he knows the game at such an intricate level that even if he loses some of that athleticism, he can still be a big serving as a floor general. He can still defend guys that he might not be able to stay in front of, but he's able to, push them into better defenders. And he just affects the game in a positive way.
And
At
he's in the
least
right spots.
sometimes.
Yeah. And he's a good spot up shooter. He's definitely that guy too that has improved his 3-point shot as the league has progressed. And I just love watching him shoot. He doesn't get an inch off the ground. He's
Nope.
on his toes and he's got that above the head.
Yeah, he's
slow
like a
release.
catapult. Yeah, like
Yeah.
he's not very mobile. You're not gonna see perfect shooting form from him. He's not Klay Thompson or Bradley Beal just lifting off beautifully into the air, but he makes shots.
He does.
Who gives a shit what it looks like if you make shots? Honestly,
And then on the bench, they got Josh Richardson, who's an exciting player. He's a young player that's, putting in really good minutes. And then they got the Grant Williams and Robert Williams. I know Robert Williams, or Bob as they call him, I think, in Boston. Correct me if I'm wrong. But,
what are they? Time Lord.
yeah.
Time
and
Lord
he's-
is his name. Yeah.
And he's been killing it. He's a really good,
Yeah.
scrappy player. I mean, if you look at the Celtics, I think they had, comparatively to the league, really good offensive rebounding stats. They were really good at that. They're a scrappy team. I mean, with Brad Stevens, when you have a solid coach, and this is just from last year, because we got the Ime Udoka this year, but well-coached teams, you see, like they always have good defense. They know their rotations. They give people trouble. Last year, finished exactly 500, 36 and 36. Vegas has them 46 and a half. I put them right at 46 and 36. So I have them, a little under from what Vegas is, but right kind of on the dot. They're going to be a playoff team in the East. Little history. They were founded in 1946, way old, and then championships in 57, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 68, 69. Nice. 74, 76, 81, 84, 86, and then 08. And
Okay,
that's
look
all.
at that
Yeah.
jump from 86 to 08. To bring it back to my point earlier, look at how many of those were won in the late 50s and 60s, and then it just starts to fall off.
It's kind of like being a
Bird
Cleveland
won some
Browns
in there,
fan.
but
It's like the Browns were good when Jim Brown was there before they were the NFL.
Yeah.
And they were the coolest team in the 50s and 60s, but as soon as everyone gave a shit, they sucked.
Yeah, which is like, okay, great, awesome. One thing I do note when I'm looking at the Celtics roster, who's your primary ball handler? Because it shouldn't be Dennis Schroeder. And I don't know if Marcus Smart protects the ball enough for it to be him. And Al
Yeah.
Horford is not the kind of guy that can be doing it for an entire game. Like, he's not a Jokic. Maybe if he had come into the game 10 years ago, he would, or if he was, 10 years younger, he would be, but that's not the reality. So are you, I mean, I know you're splitting time between all of them, and then obviously Jalen and Jason Tatum are also good ball handlers and good passers. But you don't have a single guy on that team, I think, that's going to average more than 7 or 8 assists. And
Yeah.
the reality of a lot of the superstar teams now is that you need a guy who can be the floor general when the game slows down in the playoffs. And I don't know if that roster's got that guy. It's got a lot of guys that can do it a little bit, to guys that can do it, middling. But like, if Dennis Schroeder is your starting point guard, and you already have a lot of offensive firepower on the scoring side of things, what is Dennis Schroeder giving you other than speed going downhill? Like, he's not a great defender. He's an okay defender.
Not a good
He's
shooter.
not a great ball handler. He's an awful passer. Like,
Yeah.
he doesn't like to do it, and he's not good at it. And he's an okay shooter. He's a good scorer. That's the nicest thing I can say about him. He's a good
I mean, he
scorer.
reminds me of like a Diet Coke Rajon Rondo.
I love that we're just calling guys Diet Coke something or others.
I wanted to use your comp. Or
Lower
your,
calories,
yeah.
same great taste. But the thing is, like Rondo, peak Rondo, like he's a Diet Coke current Rondo. He's a faster. He's more athletic. But
Yeah,
like
you're right.
peak
Peak
Rondo,
Rondo was one of the
44
best.
points in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Rondo, I don't know. I don't think Schroeder's ever reached those heights.
Yeah, Rondo was one of the best, especially for those 08 teams. Like,
And
I
Rondo
think he
provided you guard defense that you weren't getting anywhere else unless your name was Chris Paul.
Yeah, and he was that guy on those championship teams for the Celtics that really put him over the edge. Like, yeah, Garnett, Pierce, Allen, they were good, but I don't think anyone saw
One of the
Rajon
best
Rondo
setup
coming out and do
men
what he did.
in the 21st century of the NBA. Like a guy that elevates other, and we'll talk about him when we get to the Lakers, but a guy that he can drag a team down if he has attitude problems, or he can elevate you to a contender if he buys in. Dennis Schroeder, I haven't seen him elevate a team. Like the Hawks were okay, and he had some good battles with John Wall when he was leading those Hawks.
OKC, I thought was his best, but also
OKC,
Chris
he was
Paul
also
was
good there.
there. And I think
Yeah.
that had a huge impact because you've seen what Chris Paul can do to young teams. And I think that was a huge, like, having that presence around, and then him going to LA, not being able to do it. He couldn't carry the offense when LeBron was out. And it was just, I honestly thought, I remember texting you and talking to you about it. Like when Schroeder went to the Lakers, I was like, damn, they just got Schroeder. Like he's going to be nice. He's a good player.
Thought it was a great move.
Yeah.
And, you know, if that team ends up staying healthier than they do, maybe it is because maybe you just have him as a six-man type. If he's not asking to be the starting guard, if he's not demanding to be your starting guard who has the ball all the time, that's not his role. It's not what he's good at. Him as a six-man, sign me up.
Yeah.
He can play that Lou Will role. He can play that
Energy off the bench.
Yeah. Like he can be that. But as the number one guy who's going to have the ball in his hand 30% of the time, it doesn't do it for me. It seems like a recipe for disaster, and it seems like he's going to try and freeze out Jalen and Jason sometimes, and there's going to be issues in that locker room. But also, now that he fumbled the bag, maybe it's going to humble him.
Yeah.
We don't know.
I think that's why I do think he's going to play a lot better this year. Guy's on a contract year. He knows that he needs to step up and really prove himself to try to get the bag that he missed out on. And so I think he's going to do well. Like I said, Celtics 10 games above 500. That's enough to get him in the playoffs in the East. So I think that's going to happen. And being the capitalist lover that I am, can I request another ad break?
You certainly can.
Nice.
You're welcome. You know, head on out. We'll be back in a minute. If you are still here watching and you're not a subscriber, if you would like to skip the ad break, you're more than welcome to hit that subscribe button. If you have Amazon Prime or Twitch Prime, you can subscribe to us for no cost. You get one Twitch Prime sub every single month. If you like the show or you want to support it, by all means, hit that subscribe button. No need to. I would also say, you know, if you are enjoying what you're seeing so far between me and Matt, please hit the follow button if you haven't done so already. Tell your friends about it. You know, tweet at us. I don't have our social media up on the screen, but for future episodes, I will have all that up there. And I'm going to take a quick ad break while Matt is gone, and we'll be back in about a minute. So we will see you then. All right, we are back, and Matt will be here very shortly. Giraffe Choreographer in the chat says, want to start a show called the Go and Give Show. I feel like that would be copyright infringement, except I have not gone ahead and copyrighted the show. I also don't know if copyright is the word that I want or if I want trademark. It's unimportant. Doesn't really matter. Don't take our show name. You're welcome to be on this show sometime if you want to talk some hoops. We'd love to have you. And as always, thanks for moderating in the channel. It's good to have you here. You haven't really had a whole lot you've had to do thus far, but, you know, I hope you're watching some basketball while you're here, or, you know, I guess the Dodgers game is going to be starting pretty soon, so we'll try and be a little bit quicker with our final few picks, our final few teams that we're going to run through. Matt, did you have anything else that you wanted to say about the Celtics? You want to move on?
I think we can move on.
How many wins did you have them at this year?
So I had him at 46-36. Vegas had him at 46.5. Like I said, I think with 10 games over 500, that's definitely enough to get in the playoffs. Sixers and Nets in that division, like kind of where the Kings are in that predicament where the guys ahead of them are just too good. I think the Sixers and Nets are still like the Nets are in, like Zach Lowe was saying, a tier of their own, but the Sixers are still definitely a tier above where the Celtics are right now.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's move back to the Pacific Division, and this one. So for my number 3 and my number 2, it got a little dicey for me. It was a little difficult. People may be surprised. I actually have. This is gonna probably surprise some people. I have the Suns third in the division, and I'll give a little spoiler alert. I'm gonna end up having the Clippers second. A lot of people would probably flip that and have the Clippers third, maybe even fourth, because of the injuries to their roster, and have the Suns a little bit higher up because of the acquisitions they made during the offseason and how far they got last year. But I think you're going to have a little bit of regression from the Suns this year. I don't know if they're going to be Vegas has them at 51.5 wins. I've got them 48-49. Yeah, they've got them at, well, I mean, really, yeah, 51.5.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, they can do it. They have the firepower. They've got the star players. They've got, at this point, championship experience and a championship that, for the most part, they played very well in. And they made good additions. They got Elfrid Payton. They got JaVale McGee. They still brought back a lot of the guys that they had before, DeAndre Ayton, Michael Bridges.
I do love Cam
Saric,
Payne,
I think,
too.
is injured,
Yeah.
but he's still on the roster. Devin Booker, obviously. Chris Paul, obviously. Frank Kaminsky.
They got Crowder
Whatever.
there too. Yeah.
They got Crowder, who's a big part of their defense. And they're a good team, and I'm not going to say anything bad about them as a team.
Oh, Shamet went there too. That's where the Nets lost him.
Yes.
Shamet's a great player. He was really good for the Nets last year.
They've got a really good roster. They've got good players, and they've got good coaching. I mean, Monty Williams did a great job last year. And more power to him, because he's like one of the great guys in the league that everyone absolutely adores. I think there's going to be a little bit of postseason regression. I think, we saw Chris Paul getting a little bit beat up as the season went on. I also don't know how many more times Chris Paul can continue to, I'm not going to say Chris Paul can't keep doing it, but he's getting older. He's like 35, 36 years old. He'll be 36 or so around the start of the season. He's a small guy. He's a strong guy, but he's had a lot of injuries over the course of his career, and it's entirely possible that he's going to have a day where he wakes up and he's going to fall off a cliff. We saw it with Dwayne Wade. We saw it with Rondo when he started having his injuries. They were still able to be productive players, but as those injuries add up and as time goes on, you're not you anymore. There's limitations on what you can do, and while there's a lot of offensive talent on this team, none of them are even remotely the floor general that Chris Paul is. So as good as Cameron Payne was last year in the playoffs, taking over for him, there's going to be regression if Chris Paul misses games. So I still think they're probably going to go pretty deep in the playoffs. I think you've got maybe a second or third round exit for them. But I don't think that they're going to have a crazy regular season unless they go out of their way to be that team that's just absolutely running shit in the regular season and is winning a lot of games. I don't see that happening for them. Could be wrong. We'll see. Like I said, Monty Williams, great coach. Last year, both in points given up and points allowed, they were in the top 10. I think they were top 6 or 7 in both categories. And I think their defense might actually be a little bit better this year. They've got a legitimate shot blocker to pair with DeAndre Ayton in JaVale McGee, a guy that I have a relatively high opinion of. A lot of people don't. I think he's one of the best 18 to 24 minute players in the NBA. Obviously, we know he makes a lot of boneheaded decisions, but he's also the kind of guy.
And a fool.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy you can put in there for a few minutes at a time, 5 or 6 minutes at a time, and he can change the face of the game just by getting some opportune blocks and some lobs.
Now, on the Lakers,
he's got a little bit of a stroke.
He always put in quality minutes. I feel like he's a guy that definitely gets clowned on, but he's always brought a positive impact to the team. I feel like.
Yeah, and
so
the
you're
Warriors
right,
and the Lakers
signing,
both have great things to say about him, and both those teams won championships with him on the roster. So there's something to that. He's not the guy that he was on the Wizards, and we need to get past thinking of him that way because he does give you quality minutes, and he's a quality player. I wish Dario Saric was healthy. I think he's, he didn't develop into the guy that the Sixers thought he was going to be when he was kind of playing a little bit of point forward for them during some of those process years. But he is able to do a lot of things. He's not the greatest defender in the world, but he can shoot the ball. He's a good passer. He makes things a little bit easier on other guys on his team when he's not making boneheaded decisions. Him being injured, not great, especially as late as in the year as he got injured last year. So I don't know when he's going to be back, but it probably won't be for a while. And Elfrid Payton, I think, is a pretty big get. Another guy that didn't really pan out to be the guard that people thought he was going to be. But he has the occasional game in him where he'll go for 25 or 30 points with like 6 assists. It's not going to be a regular thing, and he's going to piss you off more than he makes you happy.
He was on the Magic, right, Peyton?
He was on the Magic for a number of years, and I think he may have been on the Knicks for a little bit. I can't remember.
He had some cool hair, I remember.
He doesn't have hair like that anymore. He finally cut it because it was legitimately interrupting his stroke. But yeah, he's
actually,
a
I
good
remember
player.
that was a story that he started shooting better
Yeah.
after cutting his hair.
Yeah, he was a good player. Also, really quickly, I want to give a shout out. Thomas is back in the chat. He says, "I'm back, just like MJ." Thomas, you probably know this, but you may not remember. MJ faxed a message to the league office to let people know that he was back. So I don't have a fax machine. If you could just like mail me a letter to let me know that you're back in the chat, I'd appreciate that more next time.
Do you have a pager? You could page us.
I don't have a pager. No one in 2021 has a pager. What a ridiculous. I guess nurses may have pagers. I'm not sure.
Nick Nurse
Doctors?
might have a pager.
Do nurses and doctors still have pagers?
I wonder just with
I
cell
think
phones.
they do.
I don't know.
I can't imagine they just have a cell phone. Like, I feel like a pager, because it can only do one thing, probably makes a little bit more
We could
sense.
ask Econ. We know some people.
We
in
could.
the
I don't think she's in the
medical
chat right now,
field.
but we could ask her. We do have people that we could ask. We know some nurses. We know some people in the medical world. I think my buddy Ian's in the chat right now. He subscribed earlier. He's in the medical world, so he may know. Thomas, thanks for coming back. If you want to subscribe, by all means, feel free. I don't know if you have Twitch Prime, but if you do, hit that subscribe button, baby. Free sub once a month.
There you go.
Back to the Suns. I have them at 49 wins. Like, I have them just below the predictions. They have them 51.5. I got them at 49. I'm not saying they're going to be a bad team. And the Pacific Division, as you'll see when I go through my win totals, is going to be the best division in basketball.
So stacked. Yeah.
Outside of the Kings, it's an insanely stacked division. But are the Suns going to go back to the finals this year? I don't think so. I think last year a lot of things had to go right for them in terms of them staying healthy and other teams getting injured for them to get that far.
They had some injury luck too last year.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. The best ability is availability. They proved that last year in getting as far as they did. But I think they're bound for some regression. I do, of course, think they're still going to make the playoffs unless something catastrophic happens. And I think it would have to happen to multiple players. I think if Chris Paul goes out, a team led by DeAndre Ayton and Cam Payne and Devin Booker, wet like book, is still more than enough to be a 7 or 8 seed. But so much is going to rely on their health and the new acquisitions gelling with the rest of the team and the health of the rest of the league. Because that was the big thing last year. You can be a great team in the regular season, but come playoff time, like if everyone's healthy, I don't see them being a top 5 or 6 team.
And if chemistry is not going well, they could always just hit up someone from Instagram.
And I think you may have seen the reports today. DeAndre Ayton, they're not talking extension talks at this point because the Suns aren't sure if they want to offer him a max extension, which I kind of get because they've got other guys they've got to pay, and he, in a vacuum, may not be a max player unless he continues to develop, especially defensively. If he becomes like a prime Dwight Howard kind of guy, give him a max, whatever.
Yeah.
But if he stays at where he is, it's a little tough to justify when you've got other guys. You're going to have to give Devin Booker a supermax. That's pretty much a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, I think Ayton could make a leap, though. I feel like he's progressively gotten better. I mean, he missed the first half of his rookie year because I think he was suspended for, I don't know if it was PEDs or what it was. Yeah, so
steroids.
He didn't play like half of his first season, and so
his development is a little stunted. And U of A, builds NBA ready guys. I mean, they're a lot like Kansas, they're a lot like Kentucky. They build guys that are ready for the league. So he came into the league pretty ready to contribute. Obviously, he then missed out on a lot of the opening of a season when teams are still getting their legs under them. And so he's a little bit behind development-wise. And I think he took huge leaps in the playoffs. I think he proved what a talented player he is and what kind of guy he can be in the playoffs. It's just maintaining that and building on that. Like, is he going to be a guy that can expand his range? Yeah.
Yeah. Like his jumper right around the rim, that like 10, 15-foot jumper. I didn't think like he was taking them and it was money. Like he shot a really high percentage. You would think like centers like that, when they shoot ridiculously high percentages, like I'm pretty sure DeAndre Jordan is an all-time field goal percentage leader. Because you would think it's just dunks.
Taking everything right at the rim. Yeah. He's catching lobs and he's taking like 2-foot bunnies.
But he was working around the rim, and I know the Bucks aren't in the divisions we're talking about, but that's really where I think Giannis made his huge leap last year, because he wasn't just going in and trying to get fouled. He was settling for those 7-foot, floaters.
Yep.
Blake Griffin is only so good until Giannis tries to drive in and literally get layups. And then he's like, wait, I can just jump right here, shoot, get it off the backboard, get it in, get comfortable with my floater game, and then he's basically neutralized. And I think if Ayton can still work on that game where he can score around the rim, and then when he's under the rim, that's a bucket. But I kind of get that. I feel like centers are sort of like the running back position, where if you have a really good one, you want to pay them, but at the same time, I feel like you could draft a lot of big guys that can or sign a lot of veteran centers that can like fill that role and provide you what you need from that position. But I do think Ayton is really good. I know that there's questions in not signing him. I think they should sign him though. I think he's a really good player.
Yeah, no, I do think he's deserving of a max, and I think they'll likely end up giving it to him. But this might be like a wait and see kind of year, where let's figure out our financials this year, see who else we got to pay, and then let's circle back to it. Rather than giving him the extension, just offer him the contract when he's a restricted free agent. We'll see. Yeah. It's a year away. Let's move back to the Atlantic Division, and we each have 2 more. Because these are going to be the top 2 teams in each division, we're likely going to talk about them more as the year goes on, more than we've talked about the other teams. So we might not need to focus on these guys quite as long. They're obviously, like, if you're listening and you know who's in the Atlantic and Pacific divisions, you know who's left for us to talk about, and they're teams that have been contenders for years.
These aren't the surprises.
Yeah, like these are the teams that the media in total is going to be focusing on for the entire year. So there's not a ton that we're going to be able to say about them that's going to be new. But we'll jump back to you. Let's get into it. Give me your number 2, and then we'll just keep it moving.
Yeah, so I got the 76ers next, coached by Doc Rivers. They were 49-23 last year. They're actually first in the Eastern Conference. Points per game, they were middle of the pack, 14th to 30, but they had a really good defense. They were top 10 defense, 6th of 30th. So, scoring still top half of the league, elite defensively. They were still playing at a really high pace too. When it comes to defensive rating, though, they were 2nd in the league. Their expected win-loss this year is still 48-24. That's what I think Vegas has them at 48.5. Let me just check. Actually, Vegas has them at 51.5. I have them at 55-27. I still think they can be a really good team this year. They can rack up a lot of wins. Just looking at their starting roster, obviously, this is a tough one because I'm assuming they either get something for Ben Simmons or Ben Simmons plays, but I feel like that's the biggest question mark around the Sixers in general is how are you supposed to make predictions on this team when like one of their 2 superstars is potentially
one of the
playing.
Most influential players in basketball right now, like as a ball handler, might not be on the team, might fucking sandbag it, might cause locker room issues, like.
So you really don't know. I mean, like Tyrese Maxey, to his credit, is a really good defender. Same thing, Matisse Thybulle, really good defender too. Maxey, not as good of a defender. I was thinking of Thybulle, but he still shoots really well. I mean, he shot almost 50% on 2-pointers last year from the mid-range. I think he could fill him, but obviously, Ben Simmons is Ben Simmons. He provides so much as an elite defender and passer. I mean, if he just wasn't as passive shooting, which we all know, and people have talked about those kind of mental blocks there, like I mean, if he had the confidence or the attitude of a Marcus Smart, let's say, where he doesn't care if he makes plays where he looks dumb, he could, and he already is elite. And just even with that, it's the frustration that he couldn't produce really too much, which is the big thing with Ben Simmons. But then just rounding out the roster, Seth Curry has been a huge player. Even on the Mavs, I thought he was great. Came over to the Sixers, played really well. In the postseason last year, he had an effective field goal percentage of 72%, shot 25 of 35 from mid-range, averaged 19 points per game. He was a really big impact player for them in the playoffs last year.
One of the most underrated players in the league, in my opinion. And a lot of it's because of who his brother is, and a lot of it's because of how long it took him to get to that level. But every team he's gone to in recent years, he has legitimately elevated. And pause 1 second for Vino.
You're good. Yeah. No, I agree completely. I mean, he's just been a lot of fun when it comes to like shooting percentages. The constant joke online is that S. Curry is the best shooter in the league. It's always Steph and Seth or Seth and Steph. They always like trade off, and he's just put in a lot of work to come from a guy that's really just a spot up shooter. You got to hustle to make work, to a dude that actually carved out a role. He started dribbling the ball a little more. He was ISOing a little bit last year in the playoffs. Like, he was getting buckets. He was more kind of morphing into what I thought of like a Klay Thompson type role, even for the Sixers last year. To the next guy who's more the spot up shooter, Danny Green. I didn't know he was 34, but he still, led the league in 93 3-pointers from the corner, which is usually
he's been on a contender basically every year of his career. Like Danny Green is the
Spurs, Raptors, Sixers. Like, he's always
Sixers,
been he's always been the guy that's been on a really good team and knows how to contribute, get minutes, and help that team win. The dude who's making the most money, Tobias Harris, is also a really good player coming over from the Clippers. I know you rolled your eyes, but this dude,
I roll my eyes at how much he's paid.
Oh yeah.
But he's a fantastic player. The issue is that because he's paid, it hamstrings the rest of their ability to pay guys. And I mean, he's a great scorer, and he works great within their, especially last year, he worked great within their system. But he takes up a lot of the cap, and he's not the greatest defender. And I mean, he's just like one of the best bucket getters, which is great. But if you've already got a lot of offensive firepower, is that the most important thing? And there were definitely some concerns about him and Embiid and Simmons on the court at the same time, all of them kind of needing the ball a little bit, and him being kind of the odd man out and being frozen out a little bit. And he can't really contribute that much if he's being frozen out. Like, he's still an incredibly efficient shooter, but he's not like a Danny Green style defender.
Yeah, but to that sort, Harris provides the scoring. They also got Georges Niang from Utah last year, who's a great defender. He shot 44% on catch and shoot threes. Doesn't really do much else, but if you're just providing that elite defending, that's sometimes all you need. They got Andre Drummond, who is literally been top 4 in rebounding percentage in all of his 9 seasons. He's not the starter. We got Joel Embiid there, who I haven't even mentioned yet, but I feel like you don't really need to mention him. Like we talked about, these are our top teams. You know who these guys are. Embiid is the best center in the NBA right now.
Yeah, him and Jokic, I think. I think they both got an argument.
Yeah, I mean, Jokic, because I think he's like the Harden-esque role where he can create so much for his teammates and still get his own, that he's such a unique talent. Embiid, he's more of the scorer, KD, even Curry type, I would say, because when he gets the ball, he just creates so much space because there's so much gravity towards him. He can literally get a bucket anywhere, and he's wet. And the fact that he could shoot threes, he's like that guy. Him and AD, when I see them hit the ground after a play, I'm just like,
every single time your heart is in your throat. 100%.
You just never know.
That's one thing about Jokic. You got to give him his credit. He's an Iron Man.
Yeah, and
much like DeAndre Jordan used to be. Like, there's some guys that play every single game, don't complain, no issues whatsoever. Embiid is not one of those guys. Like, if Embiid gives you 65 games, it's a good year.
Yeah,
that's what you want. And I mean, he may have had years where he was above that, but it's like, that's kind of my expectation with him, is that he's going to miss potentially 10 to 15 games.
Well, I mean, to start his career, literally, it would be the biggest story when he wasn't hurt. Yeah, like when he would play at all, that was a huge storyline. And so trust the process. I mean, the process is trusted. Like I said, I got them at 55-27. I think they're going to be a really good team this year. Shake Milton, love Shake Milton. I think he's a bucket getter. He definitely went off at times last year. I just think they have too much talent, even with Ben Simmons not there, to still be an elite team, rack up a lot of wins. They're going to be second place. In the draft, didn't mention them in the draft, but they picked up with their first pick, Jaden Springer, point guard from Tennessee. Then they got Philippe Petrusev, power forward. And I pronounce it that way because it doesn't look like he has a school. So I'm guessing he's an international player. And then we got Charles Bassey, center from Western Kentucky. I mean, I don't have much more to say besides I think that the Sixers are a really good team. Unfortunately, I just think the Nets are that team this year, barring some crazy injuries, crazy storylines within the team. They're just so deep. We're going to get into them next, but I think that's about what I have to wrap up the Sixers. Doc Rivers has always been a great coach, despite the memes of him kind of choking away playoff wins and things like that. I know he felt
there's smoke, there's fire, though.
But
I also don't have them. I have the Nets ahead of them, obviously.
Yeah.
Look at that team; it's insane. If the Sixers are able to resolve the Ben Simmons stuff, and I don't think they'll be able to, but if they are able to, or if they are able to trade him for a number of positive assets, I think things potentially get a little bit closer. The way that I'm looking at it right now is that Ben Simmons is worth nothing to the Sixers, so the Nets are going to run away with it.
Yeah.
But if he comes back and he has developed as a player, or if they're able to trade him for another star and multiple good players, obviously it's not going to happen. But in a world where Ben Simmons is the player that left and Jimmy Butler is the player that stayed, I think it's a far closer competition between the Nets and the Sixers than it is currently. We don't know what's going to happen. I don't think Ben Simmons is going to be on that team in 2 months. I think they'll likely have to trade him for a number of starter at best players in addition to picks. I don't think they're going to get a star in return. I think they're asking for too much. But we'll see. I'm curious to see what kind of team they can develop into. Ton of offensive firepower, pretty good defensively, good coaching, not great. I don't have a high opinion of Doc Rivers. I think he's a great regular season coach. I think Doc Rivers is the kind of guy that does more with less.
Yeah.
Like when his last year with the Clippers, when he had a roster that wasn't predicted to do anything and he made the playoffs with them, I think he's the kind of guy that develops guys really well and gives a lot of guys opportunities and works with weird rotations. But I don't think he's the guy to get somebody over the championship hump. I think his ability to do that with the Celtics was because of who was on that Celtics team. They were kind of leading themselves a little bit. But, the Sixers are one of the most interesting teams in the league. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I think you could have a chance at 55 wins. I think you could have a chance, depending on injury history and who they get for Ben Simmons, at 40 wins. If Embiid goes down and it becomes Tobias Harris's team with a bunch of random starters, the rest of the East could play their asses off against them, and the Sixers could completely miss expectations. They're just such a question mark because of that roster and the health and the way that they're constructed.
I agree. I mean, Simmons and Embiid down, I could argue that the Knicks and the Raptors both, win the majority of the games against them with those guys out. But again, that's how great Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are, which is why, I think the Sixers, if not, first in the East with their record, because I do think as other NBA people, and I was listening to a little Zach Lowe earlier, the Nets kind of FU season this year, where they're just going to show the league that they should have won it last year. Barring injuries, when you don't win it because of certain things, and I think KD won literally all of the
best player in the league awards.
Moral victory awards afterwards. It's like, oh man, it showed how great he is, but they still lost. I think
a lot of GMs predict him as being the best player in the NBA this year, so there's always the chance for that.
I did see that Sports Illustrated said that he was the best player. GMs have them winning it all this year with KD being the MVP. I did not fill in a little history nugget with the Sixers yet, though. They were founded in 1949, another one of those historic franchises there. And
they're historic in that they've existed for a while. They haven't won shit.
Another team that's starving because they won championships in 55, 67, and 83 was their last championship. So yeah, they've been the Raptors were formed and won a title since the Sixers' last title. Shout out to Allen Iverson. That's about all I got for the Sixers.
Right, shout out AI. One of the best bucket getters to ever do it. Let's move back to the Pacific Division in the West, and we're actually going to go to Doc Rivers' former team, finishing second in the division this year and potentially second in the conference the way things shake out. You know, I could see a couple teams competing with them, Nuggets, Jazz in particular. But I've got the Clippers. Vegas has them at 45.5 wins. I think that's significantly low. I think that they're putting too much stock in the fact that they're going to be missing Kawhi, when honestly I think there's been previous years, I mean, there's kind of an expectation that you're going to be missing Kawhi anyways, and teams have done fine without him.
He's a load management guy, exactly.
He's a load management guy, and he's a playoff performer more than he's a regular season great. You know, he used to be a regular season great. There were years where he was in. There was that year he was competing with Harden for MVP consideration, but it's not who he's been for the past 3 or 4 years, and I don't think it's who he's going to be going forward. I've got the Clippers, and this is going to be a little bit potentially unrealistic, but I've got the Clippers winning 53 games this year. I think Paul George is going to put this team on his back. I think he is going to be, I think we're going to get a little bit of Indiana Paul George, where he's going to try and elevate this team all the way to a title contender, basically. Not by himself, but, I think he's going to be a superstar this year if he stays healthy, if his shoulders stay together.
He was playoff P last year. He balled out.
He was playoff P in the literal way. He wasn't pandemic P. He was
he was playoff
P. He showed out, and he's done that before. When he was in the Pacers, he was that guy too. Guys have really forgotten how good he was early in his career before his leg injury and his shoulder injuries. He's one of the best defenders at his position. He's one of the best offensive scorers at his position. He's a great ISO guy. He's a great catch and shoot guy. He's an okay distributor. It's not what he's best at, but he can do it. And he's a guy that a lot of teams have to focus multiple guys on. Like he takes a lot of defensive attention. They got Reggie Jackson. They had a couple big losses, primarily Patrick Beverley, kind of a big loss for their defensive mindset. Also lost Rajon Rondo.
I thought the next 5 years were Beverly's, though.
Yeah, that's what he said. I don't think that's going to be the case because I think he's on the Wolves.
He's got like 1 year. Yes.
Isn't he on the Wolves now? I don't see the Wolves winning at all. Could be wrong.
His tweets.
Yeah, next 5 years are his. But they had some good acquisitions during the offseason. They also had a lot of roster turnover. They drafted a lot of guys. They acquired a couple. I don't know if they were free agents or if they traded for them. I can't recall. They drafted Keon Johnson, Jason Preston, and Brandon Boston Jr. And they also signed an undrafted free agent in Moses Wright to be one of their big men. Don't know if they're going to get a lot of burn during the regular season. I think it's more likely that a couple of those guys are going to be two-way players and they're going to go back and forth between their G League team. But, they've got a pretty they've got guys that are in the later stages of their career, and they've got guys very early in their career. And I don't know if they're going to be able to make a mesh, but the players that they have that have been in the league for a while are talented guys. Running through the roster, they've got Luke Kennard. They recently acquired Justice Winslow, who has never lived up to expectations, but it always feels like he's just one step away from having a healthy year where he's going to be one of the better front court players and a great defender.
Kennard was a great shooter last playoffs.
Kennard's a great shooter, yeah.
Yeah.
Zubac, not one of the greatest centers in the league, but he can give you enough of what you need. He's a good enough defensive presence. He's a good enough scorer. I
wish the Lakers didn't cut him.
Yeah, I wouldn't want him as my starting center. He's more of a bench center in my opinion. But, he developed well with the Lakers, and he's continued to develop with the Sixers. And he does enough. Like, he's passable, which is fine. A couple big acquisitions they made. Reggie Jackson, I think he's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, he's a baller.
Yeah, they re-signed him, not acquisitions, but they re-signed him to a good deal. He was fantastic in the playoffs last year, and he had a great season.
So when he came from Detroit, he was
he was a project player.
Detroit,
they had to rebuild him, and he's the best he's ever been. Honestly, he is. Eric Bledsoe, a guy that gets a lot of shine that I think is undeserved. He's a decent scorer. He's an inefficient scorer. He's not a great defender. He gets caught up in the emotions of the game too much, and he falls apart. If they have him as a starter, not great. If they've got him as a bench guy, he might do some fucking damage. We'll see.
Yeah.
Serge Ibaka, he's not healthy right now, but if he gets healthy, he's going to be a threat. Nicholas Batum, another guy that never lived up to expectations, but makes your team better in a lot of little ways. Batum can do a lot of stuff at a good to great level.
I always thought he was all-star level at Charlotte when he was playing for the majority of his career.
But
and then
he's not an aggressive player. He doesn't ever try and take games over. So he has I think he's an all-star in talent, but he's never taken that jump.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously Paul George. Like, there's not enough good things I can say about Paul George. He's one of my favorite players, even though he takes a lot of shit from a lot of people. And I think this is going to be – I don't think he's got very many high-level seasons left because I think the injuries are adding up on him. But I think this is going to be his show-out season. I think he's going to try and put the team on his back with Kawhi out and prove that playoff P is here to stay. And I'm excited to see what happens with them. Like I said, Vegas has him at 45.5. I've got him at 53. I could see him finishing anywhere in that range, but I do think they're going to be better than Vegas is predicting. Don't put money on them because I could be super wrong, and this is not the team that I want to be super wrong about. I also don't think they're going to go far in the playoffs. I think they're a second or third round exit. I could see them going far in the playoffs. Let me just restate that. I could see them going far in the playoffs. I don't see them being a title contender. But maybe next year once Kawhi is back. Maybe once they go back to the big two of Kawhi and PG, especially with Reggie Jackson signed for another year. I left off Marcus Morris. He's another guy that can do a lot of things and helps teams win games.
I was going to say
he's got a lot of potential. And Ty Lue, their coaching is much better than people gave him credit for. He's not just a guy that coaches the LeBron squad. Like, he's a genuinely good coach, and he works really well with defensive-oriented teams that have a lot of ISO play, and I can see that being the Clippers.
No, Ty Lue definitely should get more credit. I kind of was on the same line of thinking in the crowd where it's like, I mean, how hard is it to coach LeBron? But first of all, just having the players like you and having the players play their best. At the same time, there's a reason why, like, Urban Meyer doesn't work as a head coach in the NFL, for example. It's like you're playing and you're coaching millionaires, adults, human beings that you have like respect for. Yeah. So it's a completely different ball game than just straight up coaching, child athletes that you can just yell at and abuse and they have to listen to you no matter what and they're not getting paid. But, with professional players, it's just completely different. And Ty Lue was he was a player in the league. He knows the league well. And yeah, like there's a lot of times out of the playoff, like that's where they out of timeouts and stuff, not out of the playoff, but like when they have to draw up plays and Ty Lue is drawing up plays, there's a lot of great plays that come out of that. And he does really well with the rotations. I mean, the Clippers have, because there have always been that one or two other teams in the West that have been better than them, they've literally been a top 3 team the past like 5-6 years in the West. And I mean, probably even longer than that. Cause Chris Paul and Lob City, when that was in the early 2010s or so, they've been a contender
one down
for
year
a long time.
in between Lob City and the PG Kawhi Clippers. And that down year, they were like, the 7th seed or something like that?
Yeah, still in the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, Clippers are not the Lakers, and so that's the standard they're always going to be held to. They're always going to be the little brother in LA, but they're a very good team.
Wasn't that the Lou Williams year when they were when they made the playoffs?
Lou Will and
Lou was balling out,
and all those guys. They all they were a team that was more than the sum of their parts. They were really well coached. Doc Rivers made a lot with that roster. And everyone just played very unselfish basketball and made a lot of things happen. They got not exposed, but they weren't able to do it in the playoffs because those guys are not playoff caliber players. They have too many flaws that get revealed in the playoffs, and they didn't have like a superstar to take over games for them. But they were a very good team.
Shout out to Magic City in Atlanta for Lou Williams, by the way.
Magic City Wings. I'd love if this podcast was sponsored by Magic City Wings. Your boy could eat.
Oh, that would be great.
Be great.
Anything else on the Clippers, though?
Nope. All good on the Clippers. Let's move on to our number ones. And like we said when we were starting off, we're probably not going to talk too much about obviously the Lakers and the Nets, because there's so much that's going to be said about them over the course of the season. So we'll keep it pretty short with these. But you know, in the next few weeks and over the course of the season, you're going to hear us talking about them all the time. And you're going to hear everyone talking about them all the time because they are the two biggest stories in basketball.
So I guess I'll go ahead and just start with, and we could just talk about the players and the Nets that I think I don't want to highlight that aren't as talked about. Everyone knows Harden, Kyrie, KD. I mean, they just have so much name power on their team. I think
Top
the
to
starting
bottom,
lineups,
they've got a ton of name power.
literally, yeah, their entire bench is nasty too. But like Harden, Kyrie, KD, Blake, and Joe Harris, I think are the guys that they're going to go with their starting lineup. It's the lineup that they had familiar last year. I could see LaMarcus Aldridge maybe working his way into there. You know, but then on their bench, they got Patty Mills, Bruce Brown, Paul Millsap, Claxton, LaMarcus Aldridge, like, and then their draft picks, Cam Thomas. I've been watching him even in the summer league. He was the summer league MVP. He was balling out, just like a really good scorer, got a crisp mid-range game. He looks like a vet out there. It looks like when he shoots threes that he's shooting like a smooth pull-up mid-range shot. I'm really excited about this guy with all the star power that's already on the Nets. Bruce Brown is a guy that I really like. I mean, him and Joe Harris kind of fell short a little bit in some of those games in the Milwaukee series, which after having really good games, it's like frustrating why they can't bounce back. But in the playoffs, especially as being a fan of those Harden Rockets teams, I think those 27 threes, you know, in the playoffs, it's just a different beast, a different game. You're trying your hardest on defense. You're trying your hardest on offense. That's why it's so impressive that the players that can elevate in the playoffs, like KD, where you see him rim protecting and literally doing everything he can to try to hold off the Bucks. You know,
Very
like,
few guys elevate themselves in the playoffs. Like, statistically, almost everyone takes at least a minor dip in their numbers to a significant dip. The guys that go up, Giannis, LeBron, KD, Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very Kawhi. It's a very limited number of guys. Like, it's not a broad group. James Harden doesn't do it.
No, he takes his dips, but he also you know, puts up 36 points per game.
Right. And his style is not really built to, like, when things tighten up a lot in the playoffs and the whistles are getting called less, his style is not designed to be as playoff ready. But he'll win you 60 regular season games. So it's like, that's the good and the bad.
And just even in the playoffs too, like the Nets when healthy, which is why it's so frustrating that they weren't healthy, but they were playing unselfish basketball. You would think with a team of Harden and KD and Kyrie, it's like, all right, they have three of the best ISO players in the league. They're just going to ISO. That was not the case. They were playing unselfish basketball. You even saw glimpses of like Warriors type ball movement with that team because, and I just love breaking down that when James Harden was, I think he was 27-7 with no KD, no Kyrie last year. And literally the James Harden, Bruce Brown pick and roll with Joe Harris on the other side was elite. James Harden can run a pick and roll with any center in the league and he'll give them free dunks all day, every day.
James Harden, for my money, is the best regular season player in basketball.
Yeah.
I think James Harden, and we've talked about this at length before, and we will during the season, I'm sure. James Harden elevates teams. He brings the floor up of a team in the same way that LeBron does. LeBron, however, pretty early on stopped giving a shit about how many wins his team got because he, like, yeah, the Cavs years at the beginning and the Heat years a little bit. And then as the Heat years went on, he stopped giving a shit. And then the Cavs second stint, he didn't give a shit. Lakers stint, he kind of gave a shit. But, like, for a long time now, LeBron has not – he's coasted a little bit in the regular season. James Harden's style is so perfect for the regular season, and he's so focused on, like, getting the best seed possible because in the West it's always been such an important thing.
Yeah.
That his regular season numbers are just stupendous. They're fictional how good he is in the regular season.
And he elevates. It's like people are like, I hate watching James Harden. All it is just him dribbling.
It's a crazy take. He makes like, every role player into a starter.
And I'm like, I don't know if you actually watched James Harden play though. And that's why it was really validating, but yet frustrating to see just everyone all of a sudden comment and be like, what? James Harden can pass the ball when he would pass on the Nets? And it's like, that's what he did for the Rockets. Like he
Yeah.
also had double-digit assist numbers with his like 36 points per game. The only reason he scored that much was because he had to. If you look at those those Rockets teams, they had Eric Gordon, they had Ariza, they had Capella, they had what's his face, PJ Tucker. They had a lot of guys that were good players in their own right, but they were all still role players. Eric Gordon can drive and get a bucket, but he's like a role player shooting guard.
Yeah.
Like, and if it wasn't
so
for
many guys
Harden,
that have just been elevated by James Harden. Like he makes guys better. The year that he lost the MVP to Westbrook, which I think is a defensible thing to do. I think they both had good cases for MVP. Westbrook won with like 30, 10, and 10, and Harden lost with like 31, 11, and 8. So, like he
was that the year that he was 36, 8, and 8. I thought he was like 36, 8, and 8, and Russ won.
I think that was the year he won MVP. Was that he was like 36, 8, and 8.
Okay, I don't know if Giannis won it that year.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but the year that he lost to Russ, he had very similar numbers to Russ. He just didn't have the same round numbers to have the triple-double average. So, the narrative kind of took it away. And obviously Russ at that point was hitting game winners constantly. He was doing that efficiently. Like he did that triple-double average the first time he did it efficiently. He was an incredibly important player. But James Harden, like if Russ is here, Harden was here. Like they were basically the same player that year, and they both led their teams to much better than anybody expected them to. The Rockets were one of the best teams in the league, and the Thunder, everyone thought they were going to be a lottery team. They were a 5 seed. Like they were still incredible. Let's move. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we can move forward. Pumped about Cam Thomas. Vegas has the Nets at 54.5. As a homer, I have them going 74-6.
Jesus.
They were founded in 1976. They got 2 conference titles in 02 and 03. No finals wins unless you count the 21-22 NBA regular season and playoffs. I think they're going to win it this year. But let's go.
I think Vegas agrees with you. I think Vegas thinks they're going to win this year as well.
They're really good. They got a close window. KD just re-signed, but who knows what's gonna happen with the other superstars. I would just love to. I want to buy some Nets championship swag this year. So let's make it happen.
I'm sure you do. You bet it doesn't say New Jersey on it. Let's finish with my favorite team in the West. Also, my pick to win the West. The Lakers. Obviously, it was going to be the Lakers. They still are a LeBron team. They have simultaneously one of the oldest and one of the most acclaimed rosters in the sport. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with this roster. Vegas has them at 53.5. I've got them winning 56 games. I think that's enough to win the West. I don't think we're going to have a 60-win team this year. I think there's going to be a lot of teams in that 50 to 55 range because there's a lot of really talented teams in the top 8 to 10 of the West that are going to take games off each other. Their offensive rating last year, not the greatest. They were 24th out of 30th. Their defensive rating, however, was first. And it's because they were the past 2 years, really, they've been just stunning on defense. They've been
Frank Vogel is just such a good defensive coach.
Great defensive coach. And I mean, a lot of their offensive rating dips below what you would think it is because so much time is just like LeBron ISO and like let other guys work. And then them taking off regular season games and not needing to outscore their opponents by a ton. But when it gets down to playoff time, they have that in them that they're able to run guys off the court. Yeah. I'm hopeful that they're going to be a very downhill team this year. They're going to get a lot of buckets in transition. I think they have, despite having an old roster, I think they've got guys that can do that.
Russ loves to run. Like, I still think
Russ loves to run. LeBron, honestly, sometimes still loves to run.
Yeah.
Anthony Davis, if you're throwing him an outlet pass, is a fantastic guy to get out and run with. Their team this year is entirely different from last year outside of a few guys. Basically, they kept LeBron, they kept AD, they kept Taylor Horton Tucker, and THT. I'm looking through the list and seeing who else they kept. They kept very few other players. They added Kendrick Nunn, Malik Monk. I don't think they had Wayne Ellington. They may have had him last year. He may have not done anything, but I think they added him this year. DeAndre Jordan, who is super washed, but he might give you 12 to 16 minutes a game and just be a defensive presence. Rajon Rondo, who is washed except for when he's on a contender, in which case he's playoff Rondo, who's one of the best players in the world. TNT Rondo. Trevor Ariza, who gun to my head, I'd rather have Danny Green than Trevor Ariza, but he does a lot of the same
Yeah.
stuff that Danny Green does, and they're very similar players. Carmelo Anthony, we all thought he was going to be out of the league 3 years ago. He completely changed his game with the Trailblazers, and he revitalized himself and rejuvenated himself. I think him finally playing with LeBron is going to pay dividends for both of them. I think they're going to have a good time playing together.
I'm so excited to watch them play together.
Yeah, and then they've got a few other guards that they picked up for to be two-way players and in the draft. Problems with this roster are they lost some of the players that I think were hugely important for that title win, primarily Alex Caruso and Marc Gasol. They also lost Andre Drummond, Dennis Schroeder, and Markieff Morris, all of whom are big-name players, but I think none of whom were particularly impactful for the Lakers. Caruso and Gasol were hugely important for the championship run they went on a couple years ago, excuse me.
Yeah, losing
It's a
Caruso
tough
was
loss,
tough. But
but
Chicago
I
paid him,
think-
right?
What's up?
Chicago gave him the bag. Like, it's tough.
I think they gave him
mean,
like $40 million or something like that.
Yeah.
I think the Lakers could have afforded him, but I think it would have messed up their cap situation. So they told him to go get paid elsewhere. I get it. I really wanted them to keep Caruso. I think he's a hugely impactful player beyond his stats.
Hair Jordan.
He's kind of like a
baby.
Marcus Smart, and I think he also pairs really well with guys like LeBron and Russell Westbrook. And then I didn't even say Russell Westbrook. You mentioned him, but I didn't say him.
Russ.
That's like one of the biggest offseason acquisitions in basketball, if not the biggest. It's just which Russ are we going to get? Which LeBron are we going to get? Are they going to stay healthy? Is Anthony Davis going to stay healthy? There's so many questions around this team, and I've said this about a few teams tonight. They could win the championship. I actually haven't said that about a few teams tonight, but they could have a lot of wins or they could have
Yeah.
a lot of losses. Like, I don't see this team being average because so much of it is built around that big three that if one or two of them go out with injuries, things are going to fall the fuck apart. If LeBron stays healthy and the other two get injured, it might be okay. But
I'm ready
if
for the
LeBron gets hurt and AD gets hurt or LeBron gets hurt and Westbrook gets hurt, like, the team is just constructed in such a way where it's going to be high highs and low lows. So we don't know what we're going to get. I hope they stay healthy for obvious reasons, both as a basketball fan and as a Lakers fan. But you know, it's going to be a battle to make it through the season, and I think there's going to be a lot of load management going on that team.
Yeah, I think my only issue with the Lakers that I can see is free throw shooting because I do not see a lot of good free throw shooters there,
There's
but I
not
see
a
a lot
lot.
of guys that can get
Anthony
to the line.
Davis is pretty much the only one that's a great free throw shooter.
And that's where just like, again, with the Nets, like I
And
think
Melo.
as a team, they shoot like above 80% or something stupid. Like they're just like so efficient. If they get to the line, you know, they're making their shots. That's not always the case with the Lakers. And then just, yeah, I think that the way the media is, I could see them needing time to gel to find their identity to win games. I could see teams that have stayed together a little longer, have a little more chemistry, just coming out and having some maybe blowout victories against the Lakers. But then, you know, I could see them going around 10-10 and then figuring their shit out and being
Yeah.
really good.
Which is a
together
pretty
at the
standard
year.
LeBron start to a season, to start off
Yeah.
500 and then to just reel off a couple big win streaks, just take guys out of it, get near the Christmas Day games, and just go
Yeah.
on a run, and then take your foot off the gas towards the playoffs so that you're fresh for the playoffs. I do have them as my pick to win the West. I also have them as my pick to win the championship. I hate to say it because it's kind of the boring answer. I do think it's going to be Lakers Nets in the championship, and if it's not that, it's going to be Lakers Bucks because I think those three teams have a significant lead on the rest of the league. But you know, you can't predict the game before it happens. You know, we got to see the way it plays out. There's so many injury concerns for teams like the Lakers and Nets that we could end up being completely wrong about this. And you know, I'm excited for the season to start. I'm excited to watch a couple more preseason games. Yeah, looking forward to it. All good, Matt? You ready to wrap it up for the day?
I think I've gave and now I'm ready to go.
All right. We had a little give, and now it's time to go. I love that. I love that you said that. Feels vaguely sexual, which, you know, that's what I'm looking for out of my NBA shows. If you have tuned in on Twitch, thank you again so much for being here. Make sure you hit that follow button. If you feel like subscribing, you're more than welcome to do so as well. If you're watching the replay of this on YouTube, Hit that subscribe button. I'm not sure what channel it's going to go up on right now. Probably should make a channel for this instead of just putting it up on my personal channel. But hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. If you got any comments about how you think the Atlantic and Pacific divisions are going to shake out, let us know. If there's anything you'd like to see on the show or any feedback that you have, please let us know. Hopefully anyone that watched this long had a good time. Thank you for being here. Matt, absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our next episode. And, yeah, let's go watch some wild card baseball.
Let's do it. Go Dodgers. And thanks for having me, of course. Happy to do it.
I hope the Dodgers and the Cardinals both lose.
Go Max and Trey. Go
Max and Trey. That's what it is. All right. I love it.
See you,
Have a good
DQ.
one.